Chapter 686. When Elder Ji Xing woke up, his whole body ached and he didn't even have the strength to stand up. Cold, endless cold pierced into his bones, making him feel extremely afraid. What on earth had happened yesterday? Elder Ji Xing couldn't remember. His body was enveloped by a strong sense of exhaustion, and it was as if his bones had gone soft. His whole body had sunk into a semi-paralyzed state, he couldn't get up at all. Had he been poisoned? How was that possible? Elder Ji Xing closed his eyes and tried to circulate his spirit energy to check out his surroundings, but halfway through, it actually got stuck in his golden core. He could still circulate his spirit energy, which meant that he hadn't been poisoned. At the very least, he could still circulate his spirit energy. If it had been an extremely strong poison, all his meridians would definitely have been directly sealed off, and he wouldn't have been able to circulate his spirit energy normally. Taking a deep breath, Elder Ji Xing tried to use his spirit energy to break through the shackles of his golden core. This was very risky, because whether he succeeded or not, forcibly using spirit energy to break through the shackles in his body would definitely cause very serious internal injuries. And now, Elder Ji Xing's injuries were already very serious. But Elder Ji Xing had no choice but to do it, because he had to understand what on earth was going on. At this thought, Elder Ji Xing gritted his teeth. Enduring the pain in his body, he started to exert force on his golden core. It was an extremely uncomfortable feeling, like an adult suffering from constipation, and Elder Ji Xing's entire face turned red. In the end, even the blue veins on his forehead bulged. A man of the Demon Hunters Association, he would never admit defeat. A few minutes later, Elder Ji Xing suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood with a wah sound. At this point, he had already broken through the shackles of his golden core and could circulate his spirit energy normally. However, the internal injuries caused by breaking through the shackles made him feel extremely uncomfortable. He couldn't move a muscle now, and he couldn't even take out the first aid pills he had prepared on him. This was the most infuriating part. Sometimes, the most tragic thing in life wasn't when a person died with no money to spend, but when a person was about to die and couldn't take medicine. One step at a time, Elder Ji Xing took a deep breath and did his best to calm down. Now wasn't the time to get angry, because getting angry would only worsen his injuries. At that moment, his spirit energy started to circulate normally, and Elder Ji Xing finally relied on a cultivator's spiritual senses to see what was going on around the military tent. Everyone, yes, everyone had fallen. Moreover, there were even some elders who had completely lost their auras and directly died. The breathing of the surviving elders was also very weak. Elder Ji Xing was extremely stunned. What the hell was going on? How did they get wiped out so suddenly? But what was even more inconceivable was that Elder Ji Xing realized that he couldn't recall what had happened last night at all. It seemed like his memory was a little broken. At that moment, Elder Ji Xing's face was snow-white and he was drenched in cold sweat. He really couldn't imagine what kind of almighty they had offended to actually go this far. They were the elite members of the Demon Hunters Association groomed overseas. The weakest were itinerant immortal experts, but at that moment, some had fainted and some had suddenly died. In the blink of an eye, they had been completely wiped out. And the most terrifying thing was that Elder Ji Xing couldn't figure out what on earth had happened. The coordinates of the military tent where they had organized this operation were absolutely confidential, and a barrier had been set up inside and outside the mountain forest. If someone had invaded last night, with so many of them, they should have sensed it long ago. However, not only did that Almighty not cause any commotion, but he infiltrated them in an absolutely silent manner, killing them without them noticing. In the end, he was even able to erase the memories in their minds. At this thought, Elder Ji Xing couldn't help sucking in a cold breath. What a frightening method this was. Elder Ji Xing really couldn't remember, and the most terrifying thing was that Elder Mingren, who had taken 9 tails for psychological treatment, had also collapsed to the ground and was completely dead. Who could tell him what on earth had happened yesterday? Several hours before the Demon Hunters Association was wiped out, Elder Mingren, who had taken 9 tails for psychological treatment, returned to the military tent where the Demon Hunters Association was located. Because it had been discovered in time, Ninetail's psychological treatment had gone very smoothly. The psychologist had sprayed Ninetail's tails with an accelerant so that they would grow thick hair again and regain their original confidence. But as soon as he approached the military tent, Elder Mingren sensed that there was clearly something wrong with the aura inside. He frowned deeply. Had something happened? Elder Mingren immediately reacted, because he could clearly sense that the auras of the elders in the military tent were very weak, as if they were injured. But strangely, Elder Mingren didn't sense any enemy auras nearby. "Kyubi, we are going to prepare for battle," Elder Mingren said, and immediately a golden Ryatsu enveloped his body. This is a buff method that can double his combat effectiveness on the basis of the Kyubi chakra and Ryatsu's Ryatsu. However, this form can't be maintained for too long, because the Kyubi form itself consumes a lot of spiritual power in the body. At present, the way they use chakra is the same as that of Elder Poisonous Dragon. At the cost of consuming fat, chakra is integrated into spiritual power as a second source, so that it can be used together. Elder Mingren believed that he was invincible in this mode, because in the Ninetails form, he had a more terrifying regenerative ability than President Bai. Although it could only last for 2 minutes, it was clearly enough to deal with an enemy. Besides, even if he really couldn't beat them, he could choose to run. Taking a deep breath, Elder Mingren chose to step into the military tent. When he lifted the tent flap, he would never forget the scene in front of him. All of the elders had fallen to the ground, including Elder Ji Xing, the chief commander of the operation this time. There were even a few elders who were completely dead and completely silent. He had to contact President Bai as soon as possible. Frowning, Elder Mingren cancelled the Ninetails form, then took out his phone and dialed President Bai's line. While he waited for the call, Elder Mingren carefully examined his surroundings again. There was fine wine and fried meatballs on the table. It was clear that Elder Ji Xing and the others had been celebrating not long ago, toasting to the smooth progress of tomorrow's plan. Elder Mingren remembered seeing Elder Ji Xing's WeChat moments before, and he had liked it and said that he was on his way back. Who would have thought that not long after that, they had all met with misfortune? Elder Mingren sighed deeply. He picked up a fried meatball on the table, put it in his mouth, and drank it down with the leftover wine on the table. This meatball and this glass of wine represented his mourning for Elder Ji Xing and the other elders. Chapter 687. That afternoon, Odd Shuo was feeling gloomy in his office. He had been receiving complaints all morning from enthusiastic citizens, and the main complaints were about number 60 high school. Many of them were very confused as to why number 60 high school wasn't on holiday today and was continuing with classes. Although the Demon Hunters Association's revenge plan had yet to take place, they were a bunch of cunning criminals. God knew what kind of perverted things they would do to the children. Over the last few days, there had been a lot of injuries caused by these psychopaths. For example, not long ago, there had been a scum who should have been struck by lightning for stabbing 2 elementary school kids on their way to school. This kind of person should be sliced into pieces and sent to hell. Their souls would never be able to reincarnate. Why did you do it to kids? If you're so capable, come at Lingjunren. When Odd Chua saw this news, he had been furious. So it wasn't that he couldn't understand these problems, but there were many times when he couldn't decide on his own when it came to suspending classes. There were times when a person in a high position was even more restrained, and he had to be cautious in everything he did. This time, number 60 high school hadn't suspended classes because of a variety of factors, although Odd Chua didn't know what Headmaster Chen and the higher-ups had considered before making this decision. But as headmaster of number 60 high school, Headmaster Chen had never made a wrong decision, and this was indeed the case. The overseas returnee elites of the Demon Hunters Association had issued a notice of revenge in the morning, but it was now afternoon, and there was no sign of them. Brother Zhua, it seems like there's no movement now. The director's office and the deputy director's office were in the same room. Zhong Lang looked at the time, then poked his head out to ask Odd Zhua. Odd Chua shrugged and spread his hands. He also didn't know what on earth was going on, and for some reason, Odd Chua now had a very good feeling. It felt like a huge shadow was slowly enveloping him, which in the end turned into a wok that directly fell on his head. While Audjua's imagination was running wild, his phone suddenly vibrated. He looked at the caller ID. It was Secretary Dakang calling. It can't be that incredible, right? Audjua's lips twitched, and he picked up the phone. From the other end of the line came the old secretary's merciless praise. Little Zhuazi. You did a great job. Audjua, what did he do this time? Secretary Dakang, we found the corpse of an overseas returnee elite from the Demon Hunters Association in a mountain forest. Including Elder Ji Xing, who had organized this plan. Now, Elder Ji Xing was the only one left alive. The overseas returnee elite group of the Demon Hunters Association had been wiped out. Tell me honestly, did that teacher behind you make a move again? Old secretary, don't say, you, I know it's all arranged with a single calculation. Secretary Dakang, if that senior expert is willing to come out and meet me, I'll welcome him at any time. He's helped us a lot. Audjua, so now, Secretary Dakang, what are you waiting for? Hurry up and hold a press conference. This time, the overseas returnee elite group of the Demon Hunters Association has been wiped out. I want to see what the netizens have to say. Audjua, in the end, the Demon Hunters Association's grand plan to organize overseas returnee elites to attack number 60 High had ended with the deaths of almost all of them, except for 2 people who hadn't died. One was Elder Ji Xing, who was struggling bitterly, and the other was Elder Yaren, who was in the middle of a ghostly resurrection and had already been detained and arrested. These 2 were the first and second ranked experts among the overseas returnee elites this time. Even so, they had already completely lost the ability to fight, and wouldn't be able to participate in battle for the time being. It was still peaceful at noon at number 60 High. Uncle Chio's fruit pancake stall was ready to close up at noon. Just as Uncle Chio was about to push his cart away, a guest with a snow-white face holding a black umbrella suddenly appeared. This person's aura was very gloomy and cold, and when he approached, even the temperature of the stove on the pancake cart seemed to drop a few degrees. A small black umbrella covered half of the newcomer's face, and it was impossible to see his full appearance. Uncle Chio raised his eyebrows and then sighed silently in his heart. Sir, I don't have enough batter here, so I can only make one last pancake. Do you want crispy pancakes or youtiao? The ingredients for my pancake aren't very fresh at noon. If you still want it, this old man can give you a discount. The man under the black umbrella said quietly, youtiao. His words were concise and to the point, and he didn't say anything more. All right. Uncle Chio nodded and started to make the pancake. When he cracked the egg, Uncle Chio couldn't help sighing. It's really peaceful today. Hearing this, the man under the black umbrella was silent. People are like making pancakes. In the end, you have to make a careful choice whether you want to add sweet sauce or spicy sauce. There are some places you can provoke, and some places you can't. At this point, Uncle Chio had already finished making a pancake, and he very familiarly wrapped it in oil paper. Here, young man, your pancake. This customer with the black umbrella stared at the pancake and didn't move for a long time as he watched Uncle Chio push the cart away from the end of the road. Under the black umbrella, President Bai was utterly stupefied. He hadn't been standing still for a long time just now because he had stopped to think, but because he had been frozen in place by a powerful aura, which made it impossible for him to move even half a step. Could it be that this number 60 High really was a place of crouching tigers and hidden dragons? Even an old uncle selling pancakes at the entrance was so terrifying. President Bai narrowed his eyes deeply as he started to weigh the pros and cons. Then he lowered his head and took a bite of the pancake in his hand. It was fried. On the other side, at the window of Grade 1, Class 3, Wang Ling secretly heaved a sigh of relief, and his unfocused eyes refocused. The Great Soul Transformation spell just now was a way to attach one's soul to another person's body. He had used Uncle Chio's body to give President Bai a warning. Although he wasn't sure if it would work, it could be said that this was Wang Ling's ultimatum. Mother Wang had taught him to be a polite child since he was young, and to be polite before resorting to force. Wang Ling felt that his warning just now could be said to be very polite. Chapter 688. President Bai was now very upset about the failure of his revenge plan. That was a whole 15 overseas returnee elites of the Demon Hunters Association. Now, not a single one of them was left. President Bai frowned. He was well aware that he could no longer make the decision on this matter because he was afraid of taking risks. Their Demon Hunters Association's main mission in Huaxiu Nation was in fact to fight for the grade 13 spells in Beast King's remains. This wouldn't be easy, because President Bai was well aware that Huaxiu Nation had already noticed their movements and was bound to set up strict defenses in Beast King's remains. Given that the Demon Hunters Association's fighting strength had been greatly reduced, everything had become very difficult to predict. President Bai sighed. He had no choice but to send a text message to Night Chief's highest-ranking leader, Night Ghost Spirit Emperor. Lord Night Ghost Spirit Emperor, it's me, Bai Zhe. I'm panicking right now. Abroad, Night Ghost Spirit Emperor received a message from President Bai asking for help. Night Ghost Spirit Emperor, truly useless trash. In the end, he still revealed a flaw. Lord Spirit Emperor, what countermeasures do you have? Asked a delicate and elegant young man. He had a folding fan in his hand and was dressed in a very old-fashioned way. This person was called Dylan. After President Embark, the head of Night Chief's 6 generals, had been killed by that execution ball, Dylan, as his second-in-command, had taken over all of President Embark's power networks. What do you think? Night Ghost Spirit Emperor looked at the young man and asked for his opinion. Compared with President Embark's brash style, second President Dylan was a solid strategist. I suggest that we withdraw Bai Zhe and let our people take over before the plan is carried out. That way, we can minimize our losses. Second President Dylan said, of course, even if President Bai comes back, he'll still have to face Your Excellency's punishment. With Your Excellency's permission, you can have him atone for his crimes there before coming back. Night Ghost Spirit Emperor nodded. Punishment was definitely necessary. Before the master plan was in motion, they had mobilized overseas elites to launch an attack without fully understanding the enemy's strength for a bit of personal grudge. In the end, they had fallen into the other party's trap and had been wiped out. If they weren't punished for this, it would have an extremely negative impact on the entire Night Chief. Because of this, they had to be punished as a warning to the rest. Given the seriousness of this incident, it wouldn't be too much to dismiss President Bai completely and have him die as an apology. Second President Dylan said, President Bai thought that he already had enough information on number 60 high, but now it looks like it wasn't even worth mentioning. Otherwise, the entire elite group of the Demon Hunters Association wouldn't have suffered such a fate. It's just a small foundation establishment high school, but so many experts have gathered here. I have a feeling that number 60 high might be a tough nut to crack. Night Ghost Spirit Emperor stood up from the throne, his expression already resolute. He decided that apart from sending someone to take over the next big plan, he would also have President Bai figure out the ins and outs of number 60 high. At the very least, he had to know what kind of person the great senior behind number 60 high school was. President Bai's ability to recover is extremely strong, but since he sent a message asking for help this time, Lord Spirit Emperor should also give him some help. Only by exerting enough pressure can we force out the senior behind him, President Dylan said. Yes, I've already passed on a technique to him. It's a technique that I personally developed, the spiritual loan technique. The spiritual loan technique? Yes, it's a technique that uses my venerable self as the main body and is controlled through a soul imprint. The borrower can borrow money to greatly increase their strength in a short period of time. It just so happens that this technique is still in the experimental stage. Since Bai Zhe is willing to be the lab rat, there's no harm in letting him try it out. Night Ghost Spirit Emperor smiled. It's more cost-effective than a school loan, and there's no interest. You just need to use your lifespan to pay off the debt, and it's supported by installments. President Dylan, after school that day, Wang Ling vaguely sensed that something wasn't right. It was still calm inside and outside the school, but Wang Ling somehow felt that there was a hidden murderous intent. His intuition had always been very accurate and would never be wrong. Judging from the aura, this hostile aura was coming from President Bai, whom Wang Ling had warned before. Sure enough, in the end, he couldn't hold it in anymore. Wang Ling sighed in his heart. Pretending that nothing had happened, he put his hands in his pockets and left the school. Everyone in class was enthusiastically discussing summer camp activities. Since they were going to camp out in Beast King's remains, a lot of them were discussing what they should bring with them. In the end, Wang Ling didn't participate in the discussion. Wang Ling, what do you think we should bring with us? Super Chen turned his head to ask Wang Ling for his opinion, but realized that Wang Ling had already disappeared. Where was he? Super Chen rubbed his head. Wang Ling has already left. Dopey Guo pointed to the window. This guy follows us every day after school, why is he leaving so fast today? As he said this, his expression suddenly changed dramatically as he looked out the window. Holy shit! Come and look. Frightened by this cry of alarm, everyone crowded around the window, and then saw a twisted black crack suddenly appear at the school gate. More than 10 tentacle-like objects directly separated from the crack and directly pulled Wang Ling into it. This scene was too sudden, and the students behind Wang Ling screamed and ran back. Almost everyone in Grade 1, Class 3 saw this scene, and they stared blankly as Wang Ling was swallowed up by this black crack in the space. A lot of people were so scared that they got goosebumps, and several girls in class directly cried out in alarm. Hurry and tell teacher. Little Peanut's face was deathly pale. Super Chen and Dopey Guo had already dashed out. About 5 minutes later, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's small villa received a call. It was Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal who answered the phone. Because he had attended the parent-teacher conference in Wang Ling's place before, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's home phone number and cell phone were the contact details for the parent-teacher conference. At that time, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal had attended the parent-teacher conference on behalf of Father and Mother Wang, and had given himself an alias, Wang Lei. Hello, are you Mr. Wang Ling's father, Wang Lei? Director Shi's voice came from the other end of the line. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was blank for a moment before he replied, yes. I am, it's like this. Mr. Wang Lei, we are currently following up on this matter urgently, so can you please remain calm? Director Shi said. Alright, I'll stay calm. Please speak first. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was confused. Mr. Wang Lei, classmate Wang Ling was swallowed up by a black crack after school today. Our initial suspicion is that President Bai of the Demon Hunters Association is taking personal revenge, and he just happened to capture classmate Wang Ling. Director Shi's tone was very downcast. As teachers, we know that we can't shirk our responsibilities, but we still want to tell Mr. Wang Lei to prepare for the worst. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal nodded seriously. That's it? Director Shi, yes, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's face was unperturbed. Alright, I got it. If there's nothing else, I'm hanging up first. Let me know when my son's body is found. Chapter 689. Director Shi was stupefied. How could there be such a parent in the world? In disbelief, she looked at the phone number in the parents' address book to confirm that she hadn't called the wrong person. But when she had called him just now, it had felt like she had called a fake father. Previously, there had always been rumors in school that student Wang Ling came from a poor family and had a very cold personality. Now that Director Shi thought about it, she felt that this had something to do with his family education. Student Wang Ling's family circumstances were a little tragic. Feeling this way, Director of Teaching Director Shi's maternal instincts overflowed in that moment. She suddenly felt that she usually cared too little about student Wang Ling. Although this child was in the elite class and his academic performance definitely wouldn't be bad, she still had to pay attention to the psychological factor. Number 60 High's school style advocated two things, educating people and teaching. The importance of educating people comes before teaching. It wasn't right for teachers to blindly pursue grades, and the students' spiritual education was equally important. Headmaster Chen had emphasized this point many times at the staff meeting. Now, Director Shi's mind was full of regret as she made the call. She didn't know if student Wang Ling was still alive. But Director Shi and the other number 60 high teachers all had heavy hearts at that moment. Elsewhere, in the office of the General Administration of 100 schools, not long after the old secretary's commendation call, the bad news about Wang Ling came again. This time, it was Headmaster Chen himself who called Audiobook. Some students were surprised, and as Headmaster Chen couldn't escape the blame. On the phone, Headmaster Chen's voice was very sorrowful, but Audiobook still didn't know which student had been taken away. Student Zhua. This was Headmaster Chen's habit of addressing this old graduate. I already know, Headmaster. Audiobook's voice was also very gloomy. No one had expected that after the Demon Hunters Association's attack on number 60 High's elite group of overseas returnees had died, that President Bai would actually launch another attack and abduct a student. I'm ready to resign. Headmaster Chen sighed deeply. If this student suffers misfortune because of this mistake, I will feel guilty for the rest of my life. Headmaster, Audiobook was moved. Calm down first, Headmaster. How about we think of a way together? Maybe that student is still alive. He's just a foundation establishment student. His body wouldn't be able to withstand being sucked directly into a space fissure like this. Headmaster Chen was very agitated. Audiobook, can I ask Headmaster Chen which student it is exactly? You've seen that student before. Headmaster Chen replied, Student Wang Ling from grade 1, class 3. Audiobook cried out in his heart, oh my God. Master had been captured by demons. Half an hour before the incident, Wang Ling had already sensed something strange at the school gate. It was the earliest time for grade 1 students to finish school. Usually, after school, students would stay in class to discuss their homework for a while before leaving. The reason why Wang Ling had left especially early was because he had sensed the murderous intent at the school gate. With his king's eye, he saw that there was a hidden space trap there. As long as a student walked out of the school gate, they would be sucked into the space. Sure enough, that obstinate person still came. Wang Ling sighed in his heart. There were always some people in this world who didn't understand human language, and Wang Ling felt that he had already done all he could. The moment he was sucked into the space, Wang Ling's face was expressionless. The tear in space didn't affect his body at all. Furthermore, the moment he was sucked into the space, he had already cast a spell to eliminate the space trap and directly block the crack so that he was the only one who was sucked in. After landing on the ground, Wang Ling carefully looked around. This was a completely independent space, and Wang Ling's initial judgment was that this was probably the internal space of a magic artifact. The entire space was a snow-white world that seemed to have no end. That President Bai had used a magic artifact and his own spell to separate this space. Wang Ling brushed off the crumbs on his school uniform, which had been left behind after he had fallen into the space crack. These were the flotsam that had been drawn in from other spaces when the space crack had formed. In the end, these flotsam had been broken down into very dirty particles and debris. Wang Ling was a little unhappy. This stuff was hard to wash, his school uniform was dirty, and he didn't know if enchanted detergent would be able to wash it clean. While Wang Ling was thinking this, the space in front of him distorted slightly, and a young man with a deathly pale face holding a black umbrella walked out of the space. This person was none other than President Bai. President Bai's aura was already different from what Wang Ling had sensed before. We should put an end to our grudge today. President Bai let go of Wang Ling, and the small black umbrella floated behind him to reveal his entire face. At that moment, Wang Ling saw a very deep black mark between President Bai's eyebrows. This was proof that he had offered his body and soul for a trade. As the heavenly Tao said, everything in the world was in balance, and equivalent exchange was an unchanging iron law. Given President Bai's original level, if he wanted to improve his strength, he could only rely on this shortcut to become stronger by selling his soul and sacrificing his lifespan. President Bai stared at Wang Ling, full of confidence in himself after becoming stronger. I've already thoroughly investigated your strength. You're a true immortal, right? Wang Ling, Your Excellency has sabotaged our Demon Hunters Association's grand plan time and time again, and our association won't let Your Excellency have an easy time. President Bai's voice was low as he stared fixedly at Wang Ling and gnashed his teeth. In order to deal with Your Excellency, I didn't hesitate to sacrifice 1,000 years of my lifespan in exchange for this opportunity to improve. Wang Ling raised his eyebrows. He had indeed heard Mr. Liu mention some information about President Bai before. This President Bai had an extremely powerful regenerative ability to begin with, and it was even more terrifying than Elder Yaren's. It was the kind of instantaneous self-healing ability that might have already healed while he was still being beaten. Now that President Bai had been strengthened overall, Wang Ling felt that his self-healing ability should be even stronger than before. Wang Ling remembered that he had slapped the Master of Immortal Mansion before. 2 slaps to deal with Evil Sword God, so here was the problem: to deal with this President Bai, how many times could he slap him? Wang Ling didn't know yet, but he felt a little irritated. It was almost time for the final exams, and he had a lot of homework to do when he got home, which he hadn't finished yet. Chapter 690. After using the Spirit Power Loan spell to increase his strength in a short period of time, President Bai was clearly more confident in himself. In fact, choosing to trade with Night Ghost Spirit Emperor was something he had no choice but to do. Before the grand plan had been carried out, he had made a major strategic mistake in settling a personal grudge, which had led to the collective annihilation of the 15 overseas returnee elites of the Demon Hunters Association. Even when he returned, he wouldn't be able to escape Night Ghost Spirit Emperor's punishment for making such a mistake. Thus, President Bai had carefully considered his decision to attack Wang Ling this time. He had to redeem himself by doing a good deed, and before returning to Night Chief's headquarters, he had to get rid of this big problem in front of him as much as possible. Even if he couldn't get rid of him, severely wounding him would be good. In any case, there was no way he would lose in a fight. Even if his overall battle strength wasn't good, President Bai could still use attrition tactics. His powerful self-healing ability was his greatest source of confidence in this tactic. President Bai was a very cautious person and also a very cunning character, which could be seen from their previous encounters. He would never fight a battle he had no chance of winning. But despite all his calculations, President Bai had missed one point. In this world, not everyone could be viewed with common sense. In the isolated space of the magic treasure layer. In the blink of an eye, the small black umbrella hovering above President Bai's head started to exert force. A black light was emitted from the small umbrella and linked to President Bai's back. President Bai's entire body then directly flashed in front of Wang Ling. This process was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, this speed had already reached the limit of a peak late true immortal. This small black umbrella was a spatial magic treasure that was just one step away from upgrading to a world-defying magic weapon. However, the power it had erupted with so far was still a little beyond Wang Ling's expectations. When all was said and done, this was a powerful magic weapon made from 49 holy beast hides. Even if it was a first-class holy weapon, it was still much more powerful than a holy weapon of the same level. The ability to teleport when linked to its owner like this was very troublesome. If this President Bai collected all the hides and upgraded it to world-defying level, this small black umbrella might have the ability to distort time and space. He had his reasons for coming to this conclusion, because the independent space he was currently in had been created by this small black umbrella. The ability to open up an independent space was not something that an ordinary Grade 1 sacred artifact could accomplish. Even among the 8 classes of divine artifacts, the most space-type Grade 1 sacred artifacts could do was to jump through space and move across a large area. However, not only could this small black umbrella carry out large-scale movement, it could also independently open up a space to achieve spatial stripping. Its spatial attributes were diverse and complex, and its functions were very comprehensive. If he could level it up to the world-defying level, all the spatial attributes would be improved. The next step would be to distort space-time and even freeze space. This Wuji umbrella was a dangerous magic weapon, and Wang Ling had already made up his mind to retrieve it after this battle and then give it to Little Silver for safekeeping. President Bai didn't choose to hold back. The moment he appeared in front of Wang Ling in a flash, he struck out with his palm. Primordial World Stripping Palm. This was also a spell that combined the Wuji umbrella's spatial characteristics. Once the palm was hit, it would be directly torn to shreds and absorbed by the space. Wang Ling saw through this palm with his king's eye, and then dodged to the side. President Bai's palm directly distorted the air and tore a hole in this independent space. Then, the power of the Wuji umbrella swiftly sewed up this hole and the space swiftly recovered. So dangerous, Wang Ling sighed inwardly. Fortunately, he had reacted quickly. Otherwise, his school uniform would have been torn. Wang Ling had always disliked number 60 High's school uniform because it was very ugly, so he had never intended to enchant it. Now, he felt that it would be better to enchant it a little. At the very least, it wouldn't be torn, and it would also remove dirt and be washable. This is my original spell. Your Excellency, you don't look too good. President Bai sneered. He hadn't used his full strength in that palm just now, but he had already seen the youngster's expression turn very unsightly. This showed that his palm just now had a sufficient deterrent effect. There was hope for this battle. President Bai sneered in his heart. Wang Ling, there were times when you had to admit that there were indeed a few big illusions in life. For example, when it came to studying, this class isn't important, you'll understand the content when you go back. The exam shouldn't be so difficult, if I can't do it, neither can anyone else. I'll revise properly after I'm done with my homework. A straight-A student can't do this, so what if I can't? There's still a lot of time for revision. I'll give marks if I write down the formula. The teacher won't be able to tell if I write vague symbols. I should be able to pass this time. The above illusions were the same when it came to cultivation. This move worked. He was sweating just now. I must have scared him. I can't deal with this person. I couldn't beat him before, but I'm stronger now. This person looks very young and definitely isn't as strong as me. The battle has just begun. I can beat him. Other people might not be able to understand this feeling, but Wang Ling did. He didn't want to be a straight-A student, but he also didn't want to be thought of as a slacker. It was the same when it came to cultivation, so Wang Ling didn't know where on earth President Bai's confidence came from. Strong people would never say that they were very strong to other people. This was probably like the straight-A students who slowly walked out of the exam hall and said that they hadn't done well again. There would always be people who naively thought that these straight-A students were going to flunk their exams, but in the end, when they got their exam papers, they were still 50 points ahead of them. President Bai used the Wuji umbrella's teleportation ability as well as this, Primordial World Separation Palm, to launch a new round of swift and violent attacks. In the end, the palm actually turned into countless shadows that flickered in front of Wang Ling, but Wang Ling evaded all of them. Blindly dodging is useless. In that moment, President Bai was full of confidence. His attack speed was almost 100% faster than before, and it was still rising. President Bai carefully observed Wang Ling's reaction under these increasingly fierce attacks, but unfortunately didn't notice any change on his face. Apart from the slightly deflated expression at the start of the attack, the other party had a poker face in all of President Bai's subsequent attacks. Could it be that he was scared silly by him? Was he pretending to be calm? President Bai pondered, but in the next moment, a palm directly collided with his, instantly blowing away all of President Bai's thoughts. It was just a casual palm that didn't seem to have used his full strength, but the power of this palm not only cancelled out the spatial power of the Primordial World Separation Palm, it directly sent President Bai flying and causing him to vomit blood on the spot. In the next moment, Wang Ling's indifferent voice sounded in President Bai's mind. Do you have any other moves? If not, I'm going back to do my homework. Chapter 691. The corners of President Bai's mouth twitched as if he was doubting life. It was clear that this youngster hadn't used his full strength in that palm strike just now. But while President Bai had spat out blood, he had almost instantly recovered from his injury, and hadn't even suffered any internal injuries. President Bai had an extremely strong recovery physique to begin with, so he wasn't afraid of being injured at all. But the scene in front of him left him in disbelief. His primordial world stripping palm just now was one of the top 3 spells he had mastered. He didn't believe that this spatial spell, which had the power to destroy space, hadn't caused the youngster the slightest bit of damage. How could his palm technique have failed? No, this person was definitely trying to show off. At that moment, President Bai's thoughts were 1,001 things, and he didn't even have time to think about what the youngster's words meant. He was already such a powerful almighty, did he still need to do homework? President Bai instantly felt his mind go haywire. He didn't believe that his move just now hadn't harmed the other party at all. Purely in terms of damage, his palm strike wasn't just fatal, it was also extremely destructive. No matter how strong the other party's recovery ability was, the damage caused by a spatial spell couldn't be completely healed in a short period of time. This was an even more terrifying kind of damage than the serious injury state. Wang Ling's casual palm strike just now hadn't been fatal, but the frightening thing was that Wang Ling had directly offset the damage from his spatial palm technique. President Bai had successfully borrowed money from Night Ghost Spirit Emperor in exchange for his lifespan to raise his strength to the late true immortal level for a short period of time. Although he hadn't used 100% of his strength in that palm strike just now, it wasn't to the extent that it hadn't hurt him at all. The other party was definitely trying to show off. That was right. He had to be trying to show off. He couldn't admit or believe that his attack had actually been ineffective. How could there be someone stronger than a true immortal in this world? Even immortal Jin Yuan, who was said to have already attained venerated immortal level, was just a legend. A lot of people had never even met him. President Bai's breathing had unconsciously become rapid. This wasn't because he was tired, but purely because he was nervous. But even in this situation, President Bai still didn't have any intention of admitting defeat. Seeing this, Wang Ling sighed silently. Sometimes, it was indeed very difficult to admit that there was a gap between people. This required a person to have an understanding of their true strength, in other words, whether or not they had a clear idea. It was very clear that President Bai hadn't. Sometimes, people needed to be clear about who they were. Wang Ling looked at President Bai with a profound gaze. He had to admit that compared with his previous opponents, President Bai was indeed a little special. He had actually been able to instantly recover from Wang Ling's not-so-serious palm strike. Even the likes of Evil Sword God and the Old Devil couldn't compare to this kind of self-healing ability. In other words, even if Wang Ling was a little more ruthless, President Bai wouldn't die so easily. He had actually been pretty depressed in his previous fights, because he always felt like his hands and feet were tied when he fought. The law had always been his first choice. In an era of orderly cultivation, if everything was solved by killing, then it could only prove that this era was a failure. Someone had created the rules, so someone had to follow them. To put it bluntly, Wang Ling felt that he was still young, and it definitely wasn't a good thing to have too much blood on his hands. Thinking this, Wang Ling sighed and started to walk toward President Bai step by step. The moment he took the first step, President Bai felt an endless pressure directly weigh down on his shoulders, like empty tide crashing down on him. The aura of the youngster in front of him had completely changed. It was almost like it was doubling. It was just the first step, but President Bai was directly shaken into spitting out a mouthful of blood. How can this be? Under President Bai's boundless astonishment, Wang Ling had already taken the second step. At the same time, the entire internal space of the magic treasure started to fluctuate tremendously. This was an independent world which President Bai had used the power of the Wuji umbrella to open up, and it was completely separated from the outside world. The entire space was extremely stable. But now, the youngster's second step directly affected the entire space wall. Like dominoes, the endless cracks created a chain effect as the space split open in all directions. A powerful space storm swept up in the fissures, which tore the space to and fro, directly destroying space with just one step. How was this possible? President Bai felt that the situation was completely out of control under the enormous tearing force of the space. In his current state, he was like a clay bodhisattva crossing a river, unable to protect himself. The tearing force of the space was too terrifying, and more cracks appeared around him, tearing at his body. President Bai could only yell at Wang Ling, "Are you crazy? You won't be able to protect yourself if you do this." He couldn't figure out why the youngster would directly use this method of destroying space. In President Bai's view, this was undoubtedly a lose-lose situation. This was an independent space which he had set up with the Wuji umbrella. If the space directly detonated under this kind of destruction, both of them would be finished. Because at that time, even if he became a pile of minced meat drifting in the space, even if he didn't die, he wouldn't be able to return to his original world. "You actually want to use this kind of suicidal method to drag me down with you?" President Bai broke out in a cold sweat at Wang Ling's viciousness, and his face couldn't help turning deathly pale. But this wasn't the only thing that astonished him. At that moment, Wang Ling took the third step. At that moment, in this world which had been on the verge of collapse and which had become filled with countless space fissures, the fissures which had appeared around the youngster were actually all repaired. The youngster slowly raised his hand, and the space fissures instantly transformed into thousands of vipers which bit at President Bai. At that moment, President Bai finally realized. This youngster didn't want to perish together with him. Instead, after shattering the space, the youngster wanted to manipulate the space fissures to tear him apart. He was going to die. President Bai felt despair. The moment the thousands of space fissures bit at him like vipers, President Bai reflexively stretched out his hand to block them. But just as he raised his hand, everything in front of him unexpectedly became calm once more. President Bai was stupefied by this method. He could shatter it at will and restore it at will. Was this the youngster's true strength? "Do you think it's over just like this?" While President Bai was in a daze, Wang Ling spoke telepathically. Then, the youngster unzipped his school uniform jacket and put it away, then gazed at President Bai. President Bai didn't know the meaning of this action, but after the youngster took off his jacket, he actually reached into the sleeves of his short-sleeved shirt, as if he was tearing something apart. Heavenly Eye. President Bai opened his eyes wide enough to see through the youngster's movements. In the end, he actually noticed a talisman seal stuck to the youngster's sleeve. Chapter 692. The moment the talisman seal was lifted, the aura which had been suppressed all this time surged like a geyser. The youngster's aura and temperament completely changed in that moment, and there was an indescribable profundity to it. His small body was only the size of a star in this magic treasure space, but it left an indelible impression on anyone. Wang Ling's short-sleeved school uniform fluttered in the wind, and the three-petaled golden flower appeared in the king's eye again. It was endlessly deep, as if it could pierce through the heavens with one glance, and it struck President Bai squarely in the chest with overwhelming pressure. Wang Ling hadn't made a move, hadn't even made a single move, but President Bai was already sent flying by this aura and vomited blood. The talisman seal had been suppressing Wang Ling's original strength all along. As someone who had been born with the 3,000 great Tao, when the talisman seal was completely stuck to him, the number of heavenly Tao on Wang Ling's body was in fact limited to 100. Even so, this was already fierce enough. Now that the talisman seal had been lifted, even if it was only half opened, the huge gap between 100 heavenly Tao and 1,500 heavenly Tao left President Bai with a bitter taste in his mouth. All along, President Bai had judged the youngster in front of him by his realm, but now he truly understood, this youngster couldn't be measured by realm at all. Rumor had it that evil sword god comprehending one heavenly Tao was already unbelievably heaven-defying, but Wang Ling already had 100 heavenly Tao on him when he was sealed. Now that half of it had been unlocked, the pressure of a total of 1,500 heavenly Tao wasn't just enough to shake the heavens. This was a power that could overturn the entire sky. This youngster was far from someone whom President Bai could shake. President Bai grit his teeth. His first reaction was to retreat. If he braced himself in this situation, that would truly be courting death. Wuji umbrella. He roared as he called out the Wuji umbrella's name. Behind him, the small black umbrella hovering in the air immediately started to spin at his call and emitted a black light. Wang Ling, however, had already seen through President Bai's intentions. President Bai was scared. He wanted to use the Wuji umbrella's power to cut open this space and then escape. But how could it be that easy? Wang Ling's gaze turned to the small black umbrella, and several dozen heavenly Tao in his king's eye imperceptibly crushed it, forming a massive restraining force. President Bai could only watch helplessly as the Wuji umbrella stopped spinning halfway. Wuji umbrella! President Bai called out again. However, the Wuji umbrella did not have any reaction. Wuji umbrella! He shouted for the third time. In the end, it was the extremely irritated voice of the Wuji umbrella's artifact spirit that responded to President Bai. Noisy, noisy my ass. Can't you see that I can't move? President Bai, to be honest, this was one of the few times the spirit of the Wuji umbrella had responded to him. Furthermore, it was with such a nasty attitude. Is there any way to get me out of here? President Bai asked the Wuji umbrella for help. After a moment of silence, the Wuji umbrella directly begged Wang Ling for mercy. Big shot, please let me go. I only signed a contract with him. I can break the contract. It doesn't matter. Boss, don't kill me. This person has too many sins on his back. I can be a stain witness for him. Bah! Taint the artifact spirit. As a weapon spirit, the limitless umbrella was clearly frightened by the binding power of the heavenly Daos. It felt as if there were a dozen sharp blades placed on its neck. Therefore, after comprehensive consideration, the Wuji umbrella artifact spirit felt that begging for mercy was the most appropriate way. Wang Ling, after the Wuji umbrella finished begging for mercy, it immediately tried to persuade President Bai. Cut the crap, hurry up and kneel down to admit you were wrong. President Bai had never expected the Wuji umbrella to directly choose to betray him. In fact, even if the Wuji umbrella didn't have to personally say so, Wang Ling had already planned to take it back. He stretched out his hand, and the Wuji umbrella directly fell into it. As Wang Ling caressed the umbrella, he pulled out a string of golden runes. President Bai was stunned, because this string of runes was none other than the artifact spirit contract he had signed with the Wuji umbrella. Now, this youngster had actually directly pulled out this contract. After dragging out the entire contract, Wang Ling didn't even bother to look at it, and directly crushed it in his palm, reducing it to dust. Thus, there was no need for the Wuji umbrella to break the contract from the very beginning, and Wang Ling could directly modify it. Now, this Wuji umbrella had already become an ownerless object. I'll fight you to the death. President Bai gnashed his teeth furiously. He never thought that this youngster would actually humiliate him in this way and steal his magic treasure in front of him. This was no different from stealing his wife right in front of him, and was a huge humiliation. Spirit channeling. 9 Rashomon. President Bai yelled as he quickly made a hand seal and slapped the ground. The 9 ancient giant stone gates were immediately summoned by the spirit link. These 9 stone gates were simple and unadorned, like the doorways of an ancient temple. Their frames were richly ornamented with complex patterns and carved with some kind of rare and unusual beast. With a howl, the head of an evil ghost in the center of the gates abruptly opened its mouth, and a distant and desolate aura washed over the area, which turned into a huge protective shield in front of them. Apart from the Wuji umbrella, this was the last magic treasure President Bai had in his possession. The 9 gates were extremely oppressive, and this 9 Rashomon had an extremely strong suppressive force. The aura of this youngster in front of him was really too terrifying, so President Bai's first thought was to suppress him. As long as he could suppress the other party, maybe he would still be able to fight. But as it turned out, President Bai had indeed been thinking too much. Now that Wang Ling had already removed half of the talisman seal, no matter how many tricks President Bai had up his sleeve, in the face of the power of 1,500 heavenly Tao, he was just trash among trash. Wang Ling stared at the 9 huge ancient gates inside. This sigh abruptly released a wave of air. This was the king's lament. In a flash, the 9 giant gates and a top-notch first-class holy artifact were directly reduced to dust by this sigh. With a gust of wind, they turned into dust that drifted between heaven and earth. this flashy attack was of no use. In the face of 1,500 heavenly Tao, a mere first-class holy artifact couldn't withstand this kind of pressure at all, and was destroyed on the spot. The 9 gates, along with the artifact spirits inside, were completely annihilated. What kind of method was this? President Bai trembled as he knelt on the ground, his expression absent-minded. Chapter 693. All of this was just an experimental performance for Wang Ling. He wanted this President Bai to recognize the gap in their strength. At that moment, President Bai's eyes were pale as he was completely frightened by the enormous power contained in the youngster. Ever since he had cultivated this special immortal constitution, he had never feared death. But the youngster in front of him had such extraordinary means that he had no choice but to believe that this youngster had hundreds and thousands of ways to kill him. He, Bai Zhe, who had cultivated for thousands of years, was actually going to be defeated here in the end? President Bai lowered his eyes in fear. The number of heavenly Tao contained in Wang Ling's body shook him to his core, and at the same time, he secretly gritted his teeth as a hint of powerless jealousy quietly welled up in his heart. This was the first time Wang Ling had removed the talisman seal. Although it was only half, the power that had erupted was already strong enough. The reason why this was an experimental performance was because Wang Ling wanted to see if he could precisely control the heavenly Tao at his current level of growth if he released half of his strength. And when he had smashed the 9 doors earlier, Wang Ling had already gotten his answer. Given the current situation, removing the talisman seal was actually a very dangerous act. He had just sighed casually and wanted to cast a spell, but in the end, before he could do so, the 9 doors had been directly smashed by his own sigh. President Bai was very shocked, and so was Wang Ling. Heavenly Tao was a good thing, and there were too many people who pursued it but couldn't get it. But sometimes, having too many heavenly Tao was a real pain in the ass. If it wasn't for the fact that this was a completely isolated space that wouldn't affect the outside world even if it was destroyed, there was no way Wang Ling would have been able to remove the talisman seal so easily. But the damage caused by his inadvertent sigh just now had been a huge blow to President Bai. After a moment of silence, Wang Ling stuck the talisman seal back on. President Bai should now be well aware of the gap in strength between the two of them. Forget 3,000 heavenly Tao, even a blow from 1,500 heavenly Tao would be unbearable for anyone. If the 3,000 heavenly Taos were unleashed at the same time, it was likely that all the cultivators in the world would be completely reduced to miscellaneous cultivators. That King's Lament just now hadn't just destroyed the 9 stacks gate in an instant. President Bai had also been severely injured. Although there weren't any visible wounds on the surface, that sigh had already caused severe internal injuries. His internal organs had probably been shattered in an instant, but President Bai had still survived. Compared with his previous opponents, this President Bai was indeed like a cockroach. But while they were difficult to deal with, it wasn't as if he didn't have the means to deal with them. Wang Ling closed the talisman seal. He felt a little uneasy after releasing half of his strength earlier, so he stuck it back on. It was just an ordinary sigh, and it was already so powerful. If it was a spell, what would happen? But this action deeply hurt President Bai, and he felt that he was being looked down upon. President Bai crawled up from the ground on trembling legs and hurriedly popped a spirit-recovering pill into his mouth. The internal injuries caused by the King's Lament had already mostly recovered. But Wang Ling could see that this kind of recovery wasn't limitless, and required a lot of spirit energy. Currently, President Bai's spirit energy was almost at its limit, and he had no choice but to take pills to maintain his strength. Damn it, you actually dare look down on me. Seeing Wang Ling stick the talisman seal back on, President Bai felt like he had suffered an unprecedented psychological blow. This was a blatant disdain. President Bai was so angry that his liver trembled. Even if you're a tiger, I'm going to pull out one of your teeth today. As he spoke, President Bai narrowed his eyes, and in an instant, countless runes of light condensed on his body. In that instant, President Bai's body abruptly swelled up countless times in the air, and his body was covered in runes that were as black as ink. These dark runes hid a godly might that couldn't be profaned, and who knew how much power they contained. Wang Ling could immediately tell that President Bai had once again sold his body for a deal. But this time, it was clear that President Bai wasn't selling his lifespan, but his soul. Exchanging one's lifespan for a replacement was completely different from exchanging one's soul. Wang Ling was astonished and felt that things had become troublesome. He never thought that his unintentional action would actually provoke President Bai to directly resort to selling his soul in exchange for greater power to fight Wang Ling. It wouldn't be to the extent of mutual destruction, but there was a real possibility that his clothes would be torn. The Wang family's family law stipulated that apart from when the school uniform was damaged due to unavoidable circumstances, if Wang Ling had to buy a new school uniform after it was damaged, the money would be deducted from his own pocket money. In that instant, Wang Ling broke out in a cold sweat. Number 60 High's school uniform was ugly, but it wasn't cheap. It could sell several boxes of crispy noodle snacks. On the other side, President Bai was pleasantly surprised when he saw Wang Ling's expression change dramatically. Although he didn't know what had caused this initially calm youngster to suddenly look a little flustered, President Bai's first reaction was that the power he had exchanged his soul for was already enough to make this youngster feel apprehensive. Otherwise, there was no way this youngster would show such an expression. "You're scared, aren't you?" In his giant form, President Bai sneered cruelly. He was practically roaring as he shouted, his voice a little wild and unruly as it reverberated in the world. Wang Ling, seeing that the youngster didn't respond, President Bai's smile became even more brilliant. "Sure enough. You're scared. You finally know fear." Wang Ling, at that moment, President Bai's body was hundreds of times larger than before as he stared at Wang Ling in a condescending manner. "I used my soul in exchange for the power of heavenly Tao multiplication. No matter what, I'll make you taste some pain with this strike." As soon as he said this, President Bai's giant form actually transformed once again, and he actually turned into a giant pitch-black spear. The strong wind that rose in all directions really created a lot of space fissures, stirring up a massive storm that messed up Wang Ling's bangs. Wang Ling stared blankly for a long time as he stared blankly, unable to see what on earth was so powerful about him. "Go to hell." President Bai, who had transformed into a giant spear, was already charging at Wang Ling at an extremely fast speed with absolutely destructive power. "Sword, come." Wang Ling curled his lip and stretched out his hand. Chapter 694. This black spear was called the Spear of Destiny. President Bai had paid the price of his soul and used his body as a medium to transform into this spear, and this wasn't just President Bai's most powerful strike, it was also his last. Because he had sold his soul, after this spear was over, President Bai's soul would be directly absorbed by Night Ghost Spirit Emperor and he would become his puppet. Borrowing from a lone shark was fraught with danger to begin with. But when President Bai charged forward, Wang Ling threw Jinka at him at the same time. Compared with the Spear of Destiny's enormous body, the brown spirit light which Jinka had turned into was like a tiny spark. It looked so insignificant, but its battle strength was astonishing. When the brown spirit light approached the Spear of Destiny, which President Bai had transformed into, he couldn't help shuddering at the feeling of being within arm's reach. He was going to die. This was President Bai's first instinct. He sensed unprecedented killing intent from this brown spirit light. After all, this was already his final trump card. He had been smug about teaching the youngster a lesson, but in the end, he was going to end up in a sorry state. He bid farewell to the world in the most tragic way possible. Perhaps he wouldn't die, but his soul would be sold to Night Ghost Spirit Emperor forever and he would become his sole slave. This was an outcome even more tragic than death. It was over. Wang Ling stared at President Bai without saying a word or even speaking telepathically. But the moment he collided with Jinka, President Bai indeed read the meaning in the youngster's dead fish eyes. This battle was already over. In those final few seconds when Jinka collided with him, President Bai saw the initially weak brown spirit light suddenly expand to form a massive sword of light which came crashing down at him. When the sword drew closer, President Bai heard countless voices in his ears. These voices were solemn and sacred, and carried with them an enormous pressure that could destroy the world, making his heart tremble. In the final moment of collision, President Bai's eyes abruptly widened and his face was full of despair. World-annihilating sword, the most profound sword technique of heavenly Tao, sword Tao. In the final moment before his death, President Bai's mind seemed to clear up all of a sudden. At the same time, he actually felt a sense of peace that he had never felt before. In front of the world-annihilating sword, he hadn't felt the slightest bit of fear, because he knew that he wouldn't feel any pain when this sword came down. The moment they collided, the entire space within the magic treasure shattered, and an intense rumbling sound erupted. Wang Ling activated the golden light shield to its fullest extent, for fear that his school uniform would be ruined, elsewhere, in Night Chief's secret base in Mishio Nation. At the same time, Night Ghost Spirit Emperor learned of President Bai's death. In the end, he still lost. Night Ghost Spirit Emperor stared at the soul crystal ball in his hand and watched as President Bai's soul mark gradually faded. The second president, Dylan, stood aside. Lord Spiritual Venerable, may I ask how strong they are? Night Ghost Spirit Emperor frowned, then shook his head after a while and said indifferently, immeasurable. It is. Baizhi isn't completely dead. He sold his soul to me, but now that I've taken it back, it's just a remnant soul. Night Ghost Spirit Emperor muttered to himself. He opened his right hand, and a ball of blue soul light instantly appeared in his palm. This was the soul which President Bai had sold to him, but it was now completely broken. A broken soul, is it still useful? Whether it's a remnant soul or not, as long as there's a wisp of it left, it's still useful to me. Night Ghost Spirit Emperor smiled slightly, then opened his purple lips and directly absorbed this remnant soul of President Bai's. The moment he finished absorbing the remnant soul, Night Ghost Spirit Emperor also absorbed President Bai's abilities from when he was alive. Night Ghost Spirit Emperor opened his right shoulder, where Wang Ling's medicine ball had pierced through previously. Back then, the medicine ball had flown around the earth and directly blown his arm off. Even though it had been repaired, there was still a scar where it connected. But after absorbing President Bai's remnant soul, Night Ghost Spirit Emperor also obtained President Bai's extremely strong regenerative abilities, and the wound actually instantly became smooth and flat as it healed. Night Ghost Spirit Emperor's strength was to turn someone else's abilities into his own. Looking at this scene, Second Chief Dylan trembled with fear. After absorbing President Bai's remnant soul, Night Ghost Spirit Emperor seemed a little unsatisfied, and he leaned back in his chair for a long time before he asked languidly, by the way, how's the contact going? President Dylan replied, I've already taken over the Demon Hunters Association's work, and I'll set out for Huaxiao Nation starting today. Good. Night Ghost Spirit Emperor nodded. Also, I'll leave the matter of collecting the souls of the Demon Hunters Association's elite group to you. Especially Ji Xing's and Yaren's souls, it would be best if you could bring them back in one piece. Then what about the youngster who fought President Bai? Asked Dylan. That youngster? If we can eat that youngster's soul, that would truly be wonderful. From President Bai's remnant soul, he could sense how powerful that youngster was, and the more powerful a person was, the more delicious their soul would be. At this thought, Night Ghost Spirit Emperor couldn't help drooling. Dylan, Night Ghost Spirit Emperor wiped at his drool. Sorry, I forgot myself. Dylan, Night Ghost Spirit Emperor, we must be careful when dealing with that youngster. If we don't take care of him, he'll definitely become a huge problem for our Night Chief in the future. Then what is Lord Spirit Emperor's opinion? No matter how powerful a person is, they will still have weaknesses. The root cause of Baizhi's defeat this time was that he didn't poke the other party where it hurts. Number 60 high is a little strange to begin with. If we act rashly without fully understanding the other party's background, we definitely won't end well. Night Ghost Spirit Emperor smiled. My venerable self has some information I bought from Mo Immortal Castle. According to the information, this youngster seems to have an older brother, and the two brothers seem to be on good terms. The point is that this older brother isn't a cultivator. My venerable self thinks that this can be a breakthrough for us. After you arrive in Huaxiao Nation, apart from keeping a close eye on the master plan, you can also assign someone to investigate this person. Yes, Lord Spirit Emperor. That youngster's soul is a little delicious. If we can threaten him this time and make him willingly trade his soul with us, that would be great, Lord Spirit Emperor, your saliva. Oh, sorry, my venerable self forgot myself again. Chapter 695. When Wang Ling opened his eyes again, it was already evening, and several spotlights shone on his head. He reappeared at number 60 High School's gate. The place where the space fisher had appeared earlier had already been sealed off by the police with layers of seals and barriers. Several police officers who were inspecting the barrier were startled when they saw this scene. No one had expected this student who had been swallowed up by the space fisher would actually be sent back untouched. It wasn't just the police, even Wang Ling himself was a little bewildered. Wang Ling hadn't expected that he would be spat out in the same place as he had been swallowed, which led to the surrounding police officers staring at him as if they were looking at a rare animal. What's going on? Didn't they say that the student had already been swallowed? The police officers scratched their heads. They had worked overtime for nothing tonight. After being spat out of the space, what came next was naturally the police's statement and all kinds of questions. The whole matter actually wasn't too troublesome, since President Bai was already dead and had offered up his soul. Apart from Wang Ling, there were no other witnesses, so Wang Ling could say whatever he wanted. It was just that this time, Wang Ling didn't push everything onto Ajua. At this stage, it was clear that there was an even more powerful expert pulling the strings behind this President Bai, and this expert was the head of the Foreign Force Night Chief. At this stage, Wang Ling didn't really want his disciple to take the blame for what had happened abroad, otherwise it would really be a little too much. It was already midnight when Wang Ling returned home that night. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal personally drove him back to the Wang family's small villa. Standing at the entrance to the villa, it was completely silent. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's car stopped in front of the villa for a while. He thought that the seniors in the villa would come out to pick him up, but in the end, no one came out for a long time, and his expression was a little awkward. Brother Ling, it seems that the seniors are already resting. The corners of Wang Ling's mouth twitched. Grenade-throwing, this fake father, cared more about him than his own parents? Brother Ling, rest early. Brother Zhua and I will be in charge of handling the police station from now on. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal smiled. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal often came into contact with the police station because they courted death all year round, so he was quite familiar with handling all kinds of cases. President Bai's body had been destroyed along with the space, and Wang Ling deduced that his soul had probably been absorbed by Night Ghost Spirit Emperor in the form of a remnant soul. Of course, Wang Ling himself was well aware of this, but he hadn't completely explained it to the police. Because if he said everything, he wouldn't be able to explain it clearly. His current identity was still that of a student, and the most important thing he had to face was the upcoming final exam. If he were to confess everything to the police, the fact that he had great power would definitely be exposed. What's more, after today's incident, he had already received a lot of attention. Wang Ling sighed. His initial goal had just been to be invisible, but now that things had developed to this point, it was a little difficult for him to keep a low profile. Wang Ling felt that when he had directly obtained an SSR in the entrance test at the start of the semester, it had caused a lot of talk. It hadn't been easy for things to calm down recently, but in the end, the focus of attention had shifted back to him. When he got out of the car, Wang Ling gave the Wuji umbrella which he had taken from President Bai to Grenade-throwing for little Silver to handle. Wuji umbrella, Big Brother, Thunder Monkey. Big Brother, please take care of me in the future. We'll be one big family from now on. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, Grenade-throwing knew about the Wuji umbrella being taken back. Because Grenade-throwing would be responsible for handling a lot of the follow-up matters, he had directly passed on the memories of his and President Bai's fight in the space to Grenade-throwing, so Grenade-throwing was the clearest about the entire sequence of events. The moment he took the black umbrella, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't help sighing again. As expected, Brother Ling is still the best. He was actually able to directly erase a Magic Treasures contract. This method was too monstrous. In some sense, grenade-throwing senior immortal even felt that Wang Ling was like a game administrator. He had directly used his identity as an administrator to unbind a prop. But holding the Wuji umbrella in his hand, grenade-throwing senior immortal's expression was a little worried. It was very obvious from the way the Wuji umbrella had spoken just now that it wasn't a proper umbrella. The most important thing was that after its contract had been erased, this Wuji umbrella was currently ownerless. If something unexpected happened on the way back, grenade-throwing senior immortal felt that it would be very difficult for him to suppress it with his own strength. As a magic treasure with its own uniqueness, grenade-throwing senior immortal couldn't help overthinking things. The reason why this Wuji umbrella was so well behaved now was because Wang Ling was here. Who knew if it would still behave when Wang Ling wasn't around? Just as grenade-throwing senior immortal was thinking this, he saw Wang Ling suddenly grab his hand. Grenade-throwing senior immortal, Brother Ling, isn't this a little too fast? I'm not ready yet, Wang Ling. What was this guy thinking now? At that moment, Wang Ling stared at grenade-throwing senior immortal and said something telepathically, and grenade-throwing senior immortal's face instantly lit up with realization. It was as grenade-throwing senior immortal had predicted. On the way back with the Wuji umbrella which had been lying in the passenger seat suddenly moved slightly, and then it directly floated up into the air, projecting a shadow. This shadow was the human form of the Wuji umbrella's weapon spirit. It was a purple-haired girl with long pointy ears and a face covered in bandages. Her name was Wuji. Was that big shot just now your friend? The Wuji umbrella's weapon spirit asked. Grenade-throwing senior immortal raised his eyebrows. What about it? His intuition was telling him that this Wuji umbrella was most likely up to some tricks. Sure enough, as long as Brother Ling wasn't by its side, this umbrella would indeed cause trouble. Fortunately, everything was within grenade-throwing senior immortal's expectations. When Wang Ling had grabbed his hand just now, he had in fact stored a spell in his soul suppression ring. Although the soul suppression ring was a resurrection magic artifact, it also had a spatial storage function, and could also be used to store spells. It seems you're only at the soul formation stage? The girl asked in a deep voice again. Grenade-throwing senior immortal laughed. What do you mean? Are you looking down on soul formation cultivators? The young girl smiled sinisterly. No, I was just thinking, if you'd better have designs on me and use me as a hostage to threaten Brother Ling, you could tell. The girl was startled. Grenade-throwing senior immortal gripped the steering wheel with a calm expression on his face. Do you know why Brother Ling touched my hand just now? The girl shook her head. He stored 10 flames of purification in my ring, and told me that if you didn't behave, he would directly burn you. Grenade-throwing senior immortal stared at her with a smile. If you don't believe me, let's try it. The girl, you actually calculated this, grenade-throwing senior immortal, do you still want to make a move? The girl smiled slightly and then patted grenade-throwing senior immortal on the shoulder. Ha ha ha. I was just joking just now. Aren't we one big family? Grenade-throwing senior immortal sighed. Chapter 696. The Demon Hunters Association incident finally ended with President by blowing himself up, but that was just an explanation to the general public. Anyone who had been personally involved in the incident knew that the Demon Hunters Association was just the beginning, and it wouldn't be over until the head of the foreign force was caught. The next day was July 26 on Wednesday in the 14th week of the semester. News of President by blowing himself up spread all over the internet. Under pressure from Secretary Dakang of the Alliance of 10,000 Schools, all the major media outlets hid Wang Ling's information and didn't let the students know. It was the Alliance of 10,000 Schools' responsibility to protect students' privacy. Of course, Audiobook had also requested this, otherwise it wouldn't have been so convenient. Early in the morning in Elegant Little Pavilion, General Yi and his assistant, Tang Chen, were sipping tea as they read the morning's morning newspaper. The crisis was resolved just like that. Is that student really all right? Old Tang was a little puzzled. He felt that this matter was very complicated, and there seemed to be too many doubtful points that hadn't been clearly explained. Based on what I know so far, there are indeed a lot of things that haven't been reported. I asked Di Shaokong in private, this guy wouldn't tell me even half a word. General Yi's brow furrowed into a knot. Number 60 High had been in trouble time and time again, but in the end, they had all been averted. Furthermore, Zhuo of the General Administration of 100 schools, who had recently been in the limelight, had been involved in almost every incident. This person was a number 60 High graduate who had become famous after accidentally killing a demon king a few years ago. Recently, he had been rising up the ranks like a rocket, and had long attracted General Yi's attention. General Yi put down the newspaper and stared at old Tang. It seems that what you're thinking is pretty much the same as what I'm deducing. Old Tang nodded. I think that there's definitely someone pulling the strings behind the scenes, and that this person is very powerful. Da Kong has never mentioned this matter. Sure enough, what I'm most worried about is about to happen. General Yi sighed. What he was afraid of was this. In recent years, the fight against corruption had become more and more prevalent, and almost no one dared to commit crimes. But if any of the 10 generals were corrupted, it would be a heavy blow to Huaxiu Nation. Old Tang, General Yi suspects. General Yi hurriedly stopped him. I do, but we don't have any evidence at the moment, so we can't speak carelessly. In fact, General Yi had already had his suspicions a long time ago, and now it seemed that the whole thing was finally starting to take shape. He was well aware that asking Sun Dakong directly wouldn't yield any results, so in the end, if he wanted to investigate, he would have to start with number 60 High and Zhuo. This was indeed what General Yi had been thinking before the Demon Hunters Association incident came to an end. But now, General Yi had a new plan. He decided to visit the home of the student involved in the incident. He didn't know if it was his imagination, but General Yi felt that there was something fishy about this. Furthermore, General Yi had a strong feeling that the almighty behind Director Zhuo he would definitely get the answer on this trip. It seems that General Yi has made up his mind. Seeing General Yi's righteous expression, old Tang chuckled. I hope that the outcome of this matter won't be too bad. Da Kong and I have worked together for thousands of years. Logically speaking, he shouldn't do anything foolish. But if there's something wrong with Da Kong, this old man will use all his strength to take him down. Speaking up to this point, General Yi's eyes flickered. Whether it's official or private, this is the best way to deal with it. General, do you need me to make preparations? Old Tang asked. General Yi waved his hand. Not for the time being. The summer camp in Beast King's remains in Songhai City is about to start, and this old man has to make a trip there anyway. I also have to visit that stupid junior brother of mine on the way. But before that, this old man intends to clarify some things first. On the other side, number 60 High was particularly noisy this morning. Grade 1, Class 3's focus this morning was naturally Wang Ling, who had survived a disaster. Wang Ling came especially early this morning. When he arrived at school, only a few of his classmates were busy cleaning up. Little Peanut went out with a few bouquets of flowers in his hands, and was about to dispose of them. The other students of number 60 High School had bought these flowers from the flower shop after hearing about the news of Wang Ling's accident after school yesterday. The labels on the flowers even read, in deep mourning for classmate Wang Ling. Wang Ling, holding the flowers, Little Peanut bumped into Wang Ling as soon as he left the classroom, and immediately cried out in alarm, "Oh my God! Classmate Wang Ling is alive!" Wang Ling, although there had already been news yesterday that Wang Ling was still alive and well, Little Peanut still felt a little frightened when he saw him again. The class cadres who had come to clean the classroom early this morning had also officially received Teacher Pan's notice, and the fragrance of flowers still filled the air in the classroom. When Wang Ling walked into the classroom, he saw that there were actually wreaths piled on his seat. Classmate Wang Ling, wait. Let me confirm it first. Little Peanut stretched out his hand and poked Wang Ling's face. Although he had the same poker face and dead fish eyes as always, at least there was warmth on his face. It seemed that this was indeed classmate Wang Ling. Classmate Wang Ling, it's great that you're still alive. Everyone was so worried. Quite a few girls cried yesterday. Little Peanut said. Wang Ling listened to Little Peanut talk about the reactions of the other people in class when he and President Bai had fought yesterday. Among the girls, Lotus Sun and Feather Lin were the saddest. In contrast, the boys were more stable, and most of them were silent. Super Chen was the only one who acted like nothing had happened, because he felt that Wang Ling would be fine. Yesterday, Little Peanut had thought that Super Chen was cold-blooded, but now it seemed that Super Chen's mouth was indeed a little fierce. As they were chatting, Dopey Gua and Super Chen also came into class. The moment they saw Wang Ling, they were startled. Dopey Gua, yo! Wang Ling, you're still alive. Wang Ling, I've really let you down, ha, Dopey Gua, will you reimburse me for the wreaths I bought yesterday? Wang Ling, this was purely a joke, so Wang Ling's expression didn't change at all. Super Chen slapped his thigh. Look, what did I say? I said Wang Ling would be fine. This is the mascot of our class. How could he be fine? Wang Ling, did you see the news this morning? I heard that President Bai blew himself up in the space, and nothing was left of him. Super Chen laughed. Look, Wang Ling survived a disaster. Not only did he escape a calamity, he was captured by President Bai and even made himself self-destruct. If it wasn't for the fact that Wang Ling went to high school with us, I would have suspected that he was the protagonist. Is there a definite connection between the two? Little Peanut asked doubtfully. Super Chen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Which protagonist would choose to study in an ordinary high school? Otherwise, there must be something wrong with their brains. Chapter 697. This morning was destined to be anything but tranquil. Wang Ling's unscathed return became the talk of the entire number 60 high school, and directly cemented his status as a mascot. Wang Ling heard a lot of things. People were always animals that only knew how to cherish things after they had lost them, although Wang Ling had always been trying his best to keep a low profile, and to erase his existence. When they heard the bad news about him yesterday, all the alumni of number 60 high school, whether they knew or didn't know him, felt as if there was a fishbone stuck in their throats. The girls in the class were usually carefree, but because of this matter yesterday, they were all wiping their tears sadly. The person who surprised Wang Ling the most was Teacher Pan. Old Pan had asked for leave from work today. It was said that she had cried herself hoarse yesterday and was in an extremely bad state of mind, so she had no choice but to ask Director Shi for leave. The scariest thing was always a mental blow. In all her years of teaching, Old Pan had never seen her students meet with an accident, so she had suffered a very serious psychological blow after hearing this. In class, there were times when she would be a little violent with her classmates because of their studies, but in Old Pan's eyes, every student was actually like her child. Wang Ling had always felt that this was just a polite greeting, so after learning today that Old Pan had asked for leave and the reason for it, Wang Ling's heart sank. When he had acted yesterday, he should have been more thoughtful. For example, if he had left a clone at school, the problem might not have developed to this extent, but at that time, Wang Ling had sensed President Bai's murderous intent in the classroom, and hadn't had time to think about it before he had walked out of the school gate to meet the challenge. Because if he had been one step later, the space trap hidden at the school gate would have definitely sucked in the other students. This had been an unexpected accident, and it was very obvious that President Bai had made this decision on the spur of the moment, since his eyelid warning hadn't alerted Wang Ling in advance. Sometimes, it was really hard to guard against impromptu actions like this. But as the saying went, once bitten, twice shy. After this crisis experience, Wang Ling felt that if he ran into trouble again in the future, he would be a lot more familiar with it. Wait a minute, why did he say, again? Not long after Wang Ling had left for school this morning, a guest came to the Wang family's small villa. A middle-aged uncle with a righteous face and a sturdy figure in a well-ironed suit drove up to the entrance of the villa. "Pick me up in the evening," the middle-aged man said to the driver. "Yes, my lord." The driver nodded and drove away after the middle-aged man got out of the car. Because it was not his first time here, the driver was already familiar with the nearby roads. The closest restaurant to the villa was Midnight Dining Hall. Although Boss Tan hadn't officially opened for business yet and only offered some newly released summer snacks, it was more than enough time to polish it. This was a frequent guest of the Wang family's small villa, but Wang Ling had never seen him before, because every time this uncle came over, it was always on a working day. Inside the villa, Nurse Wang heard the noise at the door and hurried to open the door. "Welcome, sir. Please come in." This was an important person, and he couldn't be neglected. When the middle-aged man entered the door, Mother Wang took out a pair of slippers from the shoe cabinet, which was specially prepared for him. "Brother Situ, are you still writing something upstairs?" the middle-aged man asked after changing into his slippers. "Yes, I've written quite a lot today." "Nice. There's a new chapter to read." The middle-aged man smiled like a child. "Mother Wang, what does Madam want to eat for lunch?" "I'm fine with anything. I'm not here for food. But it's best not to make broccoli. I realize that every time I come here, there's broccoli, it's a little boring." The middle-aged man said. Mother Wang, "Very well, Madam." Elsewhere, General Yi, who had already made up his mind to come to the Wang family's small villa to find out what was going on, was in the midst of making preparations. Thus, it was very important to find an appropriate excuse. As soon as General Yi arrived in Songhai City, arrangements had already been made for his old subordinates. In fact, it wasn't just Songhai City. General Yi's old subordinates were spread throughout every province in Huaxiu Nation. Before General Yi had retired as a cultivator, all the sword cultivators in Huaxiu Nation had to listen to his commands. All the sword cultivators were part of the special police. Now that General Yi had retired as a cultivator, his old subordinates had all become leading cadres. Thus, even though General Yi had already retired as a cultivator, these current leading cadres still maintained 100% respect for his old leaders. Logically speaking, visiting the parents of a student who was the focus of the news should have been reported to the education department, but General Yi didn't want to alarm the alliance of 10,000 schools this time, so the whole thing was carried out in secret. "Everything is ready. What name are we going under this time?" General Yi sat in his office in Songhai City Police Station as he browsed through the news on Wang Ling. He had wanted to look up personal information on this student, Wang Ling, but in the end realized that there was pitifully little information on Wang Ling in the newspapers, and there wasn't even a photo of him, whether it was in the newspapers or online. General Yi was now becoming more and more curious about this matter. Who on earth was pulling the strings behind the scenes? "Yes, teacher, everything has been arranged. We'll go under the name of the Poverty Relief Foundation." A department-level cadre stood respectfully in front of General Yi. This was the head of the police department. Many police officers who passed by the office door looked at him through the window with astonished expressions. It was said that everything had its vanquisher. No one thought that the usually hot-tempered head would actually have such a well-behaved side. The Poverty Relief Foundation? That's right, this student previously received a poverty relief program jointly launched by Number 60 High and the General Administration of 100 schools. What does this child want? Energy-gathering pills? Foundation establishment pills? Or spirit-gathering pills? Or money? General Yi nodded as he continued to ask questions. In one breath, he listed the names of several kinds of elixirs which were commonly used by foundation establishment cultivators to speed up their cultivation. "No matter what this child wants, since we're going under the name of the Poverty Relief Foundation this time, we can't go empty-handed. No matter what we've helped before, we're going to double it this time," General Yi said very seriously. In the end, the head shook his head. No, teacher. This student wants crispy noodle snacks." Hearing this, General Yi was blank as he suddenly felt a little old and muddle-headed. Crispy noodle snacks? Chapter 698. This wasn't the head of state's first visit to the villa, but he had no idea at all about Wang Ling. Wang Ling's bedroom was right across from Father Wang's study, but the head of state had never gone in. But the head of state had seen the photo before. The only decoded photo of Wang Ling was stored in a drawer in Father Wang's study. Even if he hadn't seen Wang Ling in person, the great shielding spell wouldn't turn this photo into a mosaic. This photo was specially prepared for the head of state. During the period when the head of state was here, all the gremlins in the Wang family's small villa would enter a dormant state to avoid being discovered by the head of state. From the photo, this was indeed an ordinary high school student with a mediocre appearance. This was the head of state's first impression after seeing Wang Ling's photo. When they reached the study, the head of state directly sat down in the chair next to Father Wang. This chair had originally been reserved for Lai Mengmeng, but he hadn't come today. Of course, Lai Mengmeng had no idea that he had been sitting in the same chair as the head of state all this time. In Father Wang's eyes, this chair was now very valuable. The head of state could increase the retail price of a vegetable bun by several times just by eating it. He launched the head of state's bun set meal, and this chair was even more of a treasure among treasures. There were now many identical chairs in the villa's basement which had all been used by the head of state. Every time the head of state came, Father Wang would send him a new one to replace it. Brother Situ? Is little Wang Ling all right? Not long after they sat down, Princeps asked directly, if you have any difficulties, you must tell me. I can find someone to make arrangements. What arrangements? For example, a psychiatrist? Do you know Minister Luo? Princeps said. Father Wang immediately broke out in a sweat. How could he not know Minister Luo? He was one of the 10 founding generals, and also a medical saint. There's no need. Father Wang laughed and scratched the back of his head. Thank you for your concern, Your Excellency. He's in a good mood now, and went to school this morning. Is that so? It looked like little Wang Ling was in a good mood. His ability to withstand pressure is very strong. The head of state also laughed. Nowadays, young people need to be able to withstand pressure to be successful. It looks like little Wang Ling's future is limitless. Ha ha ha. Your Excellency is too kind. His results are just as so. Also, when will there be a verdict on the singer who stole your song? To Father Wang's surprise, he realized that the head of state took this matter very seriously. In fact, Princeps had sent him a private message to ask him about it. Previously, Princeps had been infuriated by a musician named Li Yuanjie. He could copy the melodies of several songs into one song. There's no need to rush. Right now, we're boiling a frog in warm water. We're planning to slowly boil it to death. Now, there are fans who regularly go to his live broadcast room to blow up and expose his actions. Yeah, you'll have to pay for what you've done sooner or later. The head Yuan nodded. As for domestic affairs, as long as they don't violate the laws and ethics and don't go beyond the rules, I can help Brother Situ arrange everything clearly. At this point, Princeps gave a thumbs up and grinned. Alright, Father Wang looked overwhelmed by the favor. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. It was good to have Princeps as a fan. He just needed to arrange everything. Around lunchtime today, Father Wang and the head of state were eating in the living room, and Mother Wang had cooked a table full of home-cooked dishes. The Wang family's villa received a call from the Poverty Relief Foundation. On the other end of the line, the customer service lady said in a sweet voice, "Excuse me, is this classmate Wang Ling's parent?" Mother Wang, yes, what's the matter? It's like this, we found out that a month ago, classmate Wang Ling accepted our poverty relief and asked for crispy noodle snacks. Mother Wang, classmate Wang Ling has been in danger recently, and the leader of our Peace Relief Foundation has attached great importance to it, and plans to pay him a personal visit to express our condolences. In passing, we'll give him twice as much, crispy noodle snacks. Saying this, the customer service lady couldn't help dropping her forehead into her hand. What kind of freakish aid resource was this? Mother Wang, then when will the leader be coming? Wait a minute, let me check the time. Actually, Mother Wang was at a loss when she heard this. She knew about the Poverty Relief Foundation, but she never expected it to call at this time, and even more so for it to attract the attention of the leader, who was planning to pay a visit. After all, they had indeed given them aid resources before, and Mother Wang felt that it wouldn't be good to directly refuse them. Is this afternoon convenient? So soon? Mother Wang was startled. After hanging up, Father Wang raised his head and asked, "Who was it?" "It's from the Poverty Relief Foundation. They said that a leader will be coming to our house this afternoon." "Have you confirmed his identity? Could he be a swindler?" Father Wang frowned. "This is a government agency. If someone dares to pretend to be one, I'll definitely make arrangements for them." The head of state laughed. Father Wang and Mother Wang, at noon, General Yi personally went to the Wang family's small villa with the supplies. He had a strong feeling that the person behind the scenes was in this villa. Before he even got close, he could already sense an unusual aura in the villa. The supply truck carrying the crispy noodle snacks followed closely behind General Yi's car. In the front passenger seat, General Yi looked ahead and probed with his spiritual senses. He was 100% sure that there was an expert in this villa. Furthermore, this expert was no weaker than him, and might even be stronger than him. Who on earth was it? General Yi acknowledged that he definitely wasn't the strongest in Huaxiu Nation, but his overall combat strength could be ranked in the top 10, and there were only a handful of people who could surpass him. Of course, he couldn't rule out the possibility that there were some cultivation experts behind the scenes whom he didn't know about. Finally, was everything going to come to light? General Yi narrowed his eyes. He was full of curiosity about the identity of the person in the villa. As they approached the Wang family's small villa, General Yi instructed the driver, "Stop the car, I'll go take a look first." He had the driver park his car 50 meters away from the villa, then got out. The moment he opened the car door, General Yi straightaway put his hands behind his back and floated over. "Let me see who on earth you are." General Yi floated in front of the Wang family's small villa, and then directly probed it with his spiritual senses. Although this was a test, the collision of spiritual senses was the most direct way for cultivators to test each other. It was like comparing the strength of a handshake when two people met and shook hands. It could directly reflect some of the basic strength of a cultivator. Inside the villa, the head of state was engrossed in reading Father Wang's draft, when he suddenly felt a chill on his back. This was the feeling of a spiritual sense probe. The head of state was startled. Someone was actually probing this place. Heh. Chapter 699. The feeling of being secretly observed immediately put the head of state on high alert, and Father Wang noticed that there was something wrong with the head of state's expression. "Someone's at the door." The head of state noted down his current reading progress, then got up and looked out the window. He had been reading happily, so he was a little unhappy to be disturbed. Could it be someone from the foundation? Father Wang remembered that he seemed to have heard the sound of a car passing by just now. The Wang family's small villa was located on East Wang Road in the suburbs, which was usually sparsely populated, so the sound of a car passing by could be heard very clearly. "I'm not sure at the moment, but I'm going to meet them." The head of state frowned. Even if it was someone from the foundation, who would come knocking on their door and sound them out like this? Then Father Wang opened his mouth, and subconsciously felt that the head of state was going to make arrangements again. The head of state stared at him solemnly. "Brother Situ, sit here and don't move. Write a little more while I'm making arrangements." Father Wang, at the door, General Yi frowned deeply after his probing. Because he felt that his spiritual senses had been broken down. The expert in the villa had clearly sensed that he was probing and had made a move to break down his spying. It was very obvious that this was an extremely powerful expert. General Yi carefully observed the villa's location. As far as he knew, this road was quite remote, and when it came to feng shui, it was actually just average. What kind of expert would choose to live in seclusion in such a remote place? Everything was too illogical. General Yi felt that he had to figure out a few things right now. 1. The relationship between this mysterious expert and Odd Zhua and Secretary Sun Dakang of the General Administration of 100 Schools. 2. The identity and strength of this mysterious expert. 3. What was this mysterious expert's real purpose? Considering the increasingly active foreign forces recently, General Yi even started to suspect that this mysterious expert was an expert from outside the country. The thing that General Yi had always been most afraid of and secretly guarded against was collusion between high-ranking Huaxiao alliance higher-ups and foreign forces, but now, he had finally caught a clue. There was a mole. End the deal. It turned out that there would come a day when he would shout out a slogan. At that moment, General Yi thought of a classic line. There were definitely spies sent by foreign forces in Huaxiao Nation, and there were even quite a number of middle-level cadres who had already been bribed to become traitors. General Yi had gathered a lot of evidence over the years. Most of the high-ranking officials who had fallen from grace in recent years were related to this. However, the ranks of those officers were too low. They were not enough. Thus, General Yi had always wanted to use his remaining energy to catch a big fish during his retirement years. It was obvious that the mysterious expert in this villa was a big fish. Just as General Yi was feeling excited, the scene in front of him suddenly changed. Several seconds later, he appeared in an incomparably scorching scene. There were volcanoes all around him, and they were on the verge of erupting at any moment. Blazing flames scorched the ground, and there were actually 9 suns in the sky. Real heat. An intrinsic spirit field. General Yi narrowed his eyes as he floated in the air, his exercise clothes fluttering in the heat waves. The instantaneous activation of the intrinsic spirit field was enough to prove how powerful the person in this villa was. And most importantly, although this person had dragged him into the intrinsic spirit field, he himself hadn't entered the intrinsic spirit field. There were very few people in the world who could separate the intrinsic spirit field from the outside world. It seemed that this was a troublesome enemy. General Yi calmly analyzed the situation. Even though he had been caught off guard and was at a disadvantage, he still didn't panic in the slightest. He stretched out his hand, and an incorporeal golden wheel of light instantly appeared in his right hand as he pulled out a threatening azure ice sword. The moment this ice sword was pulled out, the originally boiling hot ground was instantly covered in frost, with General Yi at its center, and it gradually began to spread. Not only that, even General Yi's attire changed. General Yi, who had been wearing exercise clothes, was instantly draped in a layer of black ice armor, looking like an ancient swordsman. On the other side, in the Wang family's small villa, the head of state used a projection spell to project an image of the intrinsic spirit field into the study. It's been several hundred years, but this kid hasn't made any progress at all. The head of state smiled slightly and explained to Father Wang, Brother Situ, do you see little Yi's golden wheel of light? This is his Wuji sword vault, which contains his collection of tens of thousands of magic swords. Father Wang's eyes widened. This battle scene was like watching a blockbuster. This Wuji sword vault can automatically lock onto the most suitable magic sword to use based on Little Yi's current situation. Furthermore, these magic swords are a set with the holy armor, and each sword has its own independent armor, said the head of state. Father Wang had actually thought about asking Wang Ling to provide some reference elements for combat for him to write about in his novel. But he was worried that Wang Ling wouldn't be able to control his strength and would mess things up. Furthermore, it was very risky for Wang Ling to fight in the first place, so Father Wang had basically collected battle materials from movies and TV dramas all this time. But there was a drawback to this. In the end, movies were a lot of fiction, and it definitely wouldn't be as shocking as seeing it for yourself. So in that moment, when Father Wang saw this scene, he actually felt as if his brain's conception and governing vessels had been opened up. This was obviously a sign of a burst of inspiration. The head of state had seen this scene before. But most of the time, Father Wang would only experience this burst of inspiration when he smoked a cigar. Thus, the head of state would send Father Wang cigars every month. But in recent months, just smoking cigars didn't seem to work anymore, and Father Wang had been looking for new ways to help him gain inspiration. Previously, Father Wang had been obsessed with the toilet for a while, but had given up because he got hemorrhoids after sitting for too long. Now, the head of state's eyes instantly lit up when he saw this scene. Brother Situ, inspiration? Yes. Father Wang nodded solemnly. What Your Excellency is watching now happens to be a fight scene, and I've been thinking about how to write it. If possible, I hope to have more battle materials. Good. Leave it to me. The head of state nodded. Didn't he just want to watch a fight scene? Wasn't that simple? Chapter 700. Even though Father Wang had a wealth of writing experience, he wasn't perfect. He had always felt that battle scenes were his shortcoming, because he had never had particularly direct combat material. Thus, this was a rare opportunity for Father Wang to collect some reliable material to enrich his writing. What a troublesome guy. General Yi frowned after summoning the Cold Frost sword from the Wuji sword repository and donning the Cold Frost armor. The Cold Frost sword was currently the most suitable magic sword to restrain this scorching field, but he knew that he wouldn't be able to rely on it alone for too long. The other party was stronger than him, and General Yi could directly sense that the temperature of the field was still rising, so he had to break it as soon as possible. Even if I have to stake my name as Blade Master, I have to cut this field open. General Yi took a deep breath and poured endless spirit energy into the Cold Frost sword in his hand. In a split second, a vast expanse of ice fog spread out, and surging cold air covered half the field. Father Wang stared at this scene in amazement, and then saw the cold air that had spread out in all directions actually start to condense again, swiftly converging into an ice-blue sword light which slashed through the air. The sword light pierced the sky and cut through space as easily as cutting through tofu. The Cold Frost sword cut open the space of the intrinsic spirit field without the slightest bit of effort. Father Wang clicked his tongue in amazement at this scene. As expected of General Yi, putting Wang Ling aside, Father Wang remembered that according to this year's latest ranking list of Huaxiao cultivators' combat strength, General Yi's overall combat strength was in the top 10. Did you think it was over just like that? The head of state chuckled. Father Wang stared at the broadcast with a puzzled expression. General Yi's sword strike just now had indeed broken open the intrinsic spirit field. Judging from the smile on General Yi's face, it was clear that he was extremely confident in his sword strike just now. But in the next moment, General Yi's expression gradually paled. Because he realized that he was still inside the intrinsic spirit field. And this time, it was different from before. The number of suns in the sky had doubled to 18. How can this be? General Yi stared at the scene in front of him in disbelief. In the end, little Yi is still too young. In the study, Princeps looked at the image and explained, I've never used my intrinsic spirit field on little Yi before, so he doesn't know that it's one of my tricks. Father Wang listened very carefully as he made notes on the computer. Do intrinsic spirit fields have different attributes? Of course. Princeps nodded. As we all know, the intrinsic spirit field is a form of the small world, also known as the internal small world. Once it was completed in the body, it could be instantly used in battle. In addition, all the spirit energy in the intrinsic spirit field was only available to the user of the field. In other words, once you fall into an intrinsic spirit field, the one who is dragged into it must think of a way to break free as soon as possible. Otherwise, once you run out of spirit energy, you'll be at the mercy of others. And the attribute that Brother Situ spoke of, in other words, should be the secret arts of spirit realm. Everyone had their own unique secret technique in their domain. Usually, it's divided according to the 5 elements of the spirit root. As for my domain mystic art, it looks like flames, but in fact, it's a kind of infinite ability. Father Wang collected the information earnestly. Unlimited abilities. Can you explain in more detail? Actually, Brother Situ can think of it as a set of dolls. My intrinsic spirit field has a total of 9 layers. If you want to break free, you have to break all 9 layers at the same time. Just now, little Yi only broke the innermost layer. Speaking up to this point, the head of state smiled slightly. Little E is still too young. If there are only 9 layers, why do you say it's infinite? That's simple, because the intrinsic spirit field will repair itself. That is to say, if little E doesn't hurry up and break the next 8 layers, once the innermost layer that has just been broken is repaired, it will wrap itself around the outermost layer again. And this is limitless power. For some reason, Father Wang suddenly felt that General E was a little miserable. Just as the head of state had said before, because General E had never seen his intrinsic spirit field before, he had no idea who his enemy was at the moment. Even for someone as experienced and knowledgeable as General E, this was the first time he had seen an intrinsic spirit field with an infinite attribute, and he had no idea what kind of situation he was facing. The second layer of the intrinsic spirit field was hotter than the first, and the cold frost sword was less effective. General E saw that beads of water had already condensed on the cold frost sword, and it was actually starting to melt. A multi-layer intrinsic spirit field. This was General Yi's initial judgment. Although he wasn't completely right, it was already very difficult for him to make the connection in this situation. At that moment, in the study, the head of state suddenly looked at Father Wang. Brother Situ, do you want to see Little Yi's most powerful sword? But it won't be easy to get Little Yi to take it out, we have to infuriate him. All right. Father Wang looked like he was watching a good show. But how do we infuriate him? After all, at General Yi's realm, it was basically impossible for him to get angry or go berserk, so it would be a little difficult to infuriate him. And this difficulty was second only to Wang Ling's smile. No one knows Little Yi's situation better than I do. I'll make the arrangements. Brother Situ, look at this. After saying that, the head of state opened his eyes to look at the broadcast, and said softly to General E in the intrinsic spirit field, scared? In Father Wang's ears, these were 3 very soft words, but in the intrinsic spirit field, they were infinitely amplified to a deafening effect, and General E couldn't help covering his ears. Furthermore, the head of state's voice had changed, making it impossible for General E to distinguish his true identity. Your Excellency, who on earth are you? General E asked as he stood in the air of the second layer of the intrinsic spirit field after coming back to his senses. The head of state, you don't have the right to know who I am. I'm just reminding you that if you go on like this, you'll undoubtedly die. So, do you want to surrender? You want me to surrender? General E took a deep breath. Because he didn't understand the situation in this intrinsic spirit field at all, General E actually felt that it wasn't a bad idea to feign surrender at this time. All was fair in war. As long as he could get out of here, the next time he was on guard, it wouldn't be so easy for this person to drag him into the intrinsic spirit field again. Just as General E was thinking this, the head of state's voice rang out again. I want you to shout 3 times here. I'm not Blade Master. As long as you shout, I'll let you out. Father Wang never expected General Yi's expression to change abruptly at these words. He saw General Yi's face tremble slightly as traces of golden-red sword chi began to rise from the surface of his body, and even his white hedgehog head was dyed golden red. Chapter 701. Are you finally angry? The head of state smiled as he looked at General E, who seemed to have become a different person. It was rare to see General E in this state. Apart from when he had fought the 7 demon gods back then, he had rarely seen General E in this state. What's this state? Father Wang was very curious. This is Little E's potential development state. Simply put, it's a technique that uses the boundless sword chi to activate the meridians in the body and thus stimulate the body's potential. It's risky to a certain extent, the head of state said. Back then, it was Sword Immortal Fan Rui who developed this boundless sword Dao, but Little E was the only one who received it. When he said this, Father Wang had a look of realization on his face. He also knew about Evil Sword God's arrest. If this was the case, then Evil Sword God's murder of his Shifu back then was most likely due to jealousy. The head of state's next words confirmed Father Wang's speculation. Brother Situ should have heard that Fan Rui had two disciples. One was Little Yi, and the other was Chen Nanxian, who is now known as Evil Sword God. Back then, in order to choose a successor to Boundless Sword Dao, Fan Rui was very conflicted, and even came to me for advice. Your Excellency, Head of State and Sword Immortal knew each other? We were classmates. The Head of State nodded. Back then, Chen Nanxian took revenge on Fan Rui for passing Boundless Sword Dao to Little Yi, and meticulously plotted to kill his Shifu. But in fact, Fan Rui was already aware of this long ago. Fan Rui has always been a cautious person, and wouldn't fall for it so easily. So Sword Immortal isn't dead? Father Wang remembered that he had once searched up news on Evil Sword God out of curiosity, and in many comments online, there had always been news that Sword Immortal Fan Rui hadn't really died. But in the end, these were just speculations, and there was no evidence to prove it. Fan Rui has indeed perished. At that moment, the head of state revealed the truth of what happened back then. But he didn't die because he couldn't defeat Chen Nanxian, as the rumors say. In fact, in that battle back then, Fan Rui deliberately let Chen Nanxian have the opportunity to take advantage of. Chen Nanxian naively thought that his sword skills had surpassed Shifu's, but that wasn't the case. Hearing this, Father Wang couldn't help thinking. No wonder Evil Sword God had been so arrogant all these years, looking for people to fight one-on-one with everywhere. It looked like he had misjudged his own strength. No wonder Ling Ling had beaten him up. Father Wang couldn't help sighing. Is Sword Immortal doing this to guide us? Yes, Brother Situ is right. The head of state said noncommittally, back then, when Fan Rui chose the sole successor of the limitless sword doctrine from the two of them, Chen Nanxian had always harbored hatred in his heart. But Fan Rui always believed that Chen Nanxuan's nature wasn't bad, and he wanted to use his death to guide this disciple onto the right path. But unfortunately, Chen Nanxian still walked on this path in the end. Then does Your Excellency know why Sword Immortal chose General Yi to be the successor of Boundless Sword Dao? What are the specific criteria? I really don't know. Princeps clicked his tongue. He really did not know much about this matter. I went to ask Little Yi privately before, but he said that this matter was related to the secrets of the limitless sword doctrine, so I did not ask any further. But there was one thing that could be confirmed. When Fan Rui chose his successor, the final evaluation index was not sword skill or comprehensive combat strength. Back then, Little Yi and Chen Nanxuan's sword skills were almost on par. After listening to the head of state, Father Wang raised his eyebrows and felt that this matter was becoming more and more interesting. If it wasn't based on sword skill or combat strength, what was it based on? Was it a competition to see who was more naughty? At that moment, Blade Master General Yi, who had entered the limitless sword doctrine, looked like his entire aura had changed dramatically. At that moment, General Yi made a hand seal with one hand. Limitless sword chi scamper. Along with the golden red sword chi that burst forth from General Yi's body, the cold frost sword actually emitted a dazzling azure cold light, as if it had been strengthened. The water droplets on the sword had already completely disappeared, and the power of ice and frost was on full display in that moment. Your Excellency's spiritual domain is very strong, but perhaps you don't know how powerful my limitless sword chi is. General Yi stood with his hands behind his back. He let go of the cold frost sword, and it actually started to spin continuously around him to form a 30-foot sword defense that firmly wrapped him up. Boundless Sword Doctrine strengthened the Cold Frost Sword, and also strengthened the Cold Frost armor that General Yi was wearing, so that he was protected from the hot environment. But this was just the beginning, because General Yi still hadn't taken out his most powerful magic sword. Father Wang stared fixedly at the image projected in the air. Several dozen seconds later, General Yi opened his hand again, and the entrance to the limitless sword vault in the air opened once more. General Yi took out something unexpected from it. It wasn't a complete magic sword, but a sword hilt. A sword hilt. Father Wang was blank at this scene. On the side, the head of state was already in emotional mode when he saw this sword hilt. I never thought that after so many years, I would still be able to see little Yi take out this magic sword. I really miss it. What kind of magic sword is this? Father Wang asked. Everyone thinks that Sword Immortal Fan Rui's royal magic swords are sky-cleaving and brilliant martial, but that's not the case. This sword hilt is Fan Rui's greatest treasure, and it was also the symbol of the successor of limitless sword doctrine that he had given to little Yi back then. Only someone who understands limitless sword doctrine can use this sword. The head of state gazed at the image and smiled slightly. If little Yi gets serious, my infinite spirit domain really won't be able to trap him. The head of state was well aware of this sword's origin, because it was a world-defying magic weapon. At that moment, General Yi made his move again. His body was protected by the frost sword. He held the sword hilt with both hands and raised the entire sword hilt high above his head. A few seconds later, Father Wang saw countless qi from all over the spirit domain flow toward the sword hilt, merging bit by bit as it tried to condense into the body of the sword. Brother Situ, this is little Yi's limitless sword doctrine, the head of state smiled. Limitless sword doctrine is a technique constructed from all the qi in the world. With sword qi as its foundation, it absorbs different kinds of qi to condense them. If it's in a place with a lot of people, even the breath we exhale will be absorbed by little Yi and turned into power. In the end, the power of a drop of water will condense into a powerful force as vast as the sea, which will then become the limitless sword. So this sword is called the limitless sword. Father Wang was entranced. No, the limitless sword is just the name of the sword, the head of state corrected. If you include the sword hilt, this sword should be called the Sword of Invincible Qi. Chapter 702. Everything was going according to the head of state's plan. This was General Yi's most powerful sword strike, and there was no way he could break through this infinite intrinsic spirit field unless he used his most powerful sword technique. From the very beginning, this had been the head of state's goal. This scene was indeed extremely shocking. In today's era of peace, how could one casually see a great battle between true immortals? General Yi's sword strike now was like a giant special effects film, and Father Wang's heart rippled as he watched. Countless streams of qi condensed into a solid force on the sword. In a split second, sword qi whistled through the air, and golden red sword light flourished as it directly tore through the second layer of space. The volcanoes in the scene almost instantly disintegrated into rubble, and then disintegrated into even finer particles until they became powder, which was finally sucked into the space fissure. With just one sword strike, General Yi had revealed his most powerful divine ability. The golden red sword light, which was tens of thousands of zhang wide, sliced forward with unparalleled godly might. The intrinsic spirit field was cut open like a 1,000-layer cake, and each layer of the space wall could be clearly seen. The whole process lasted a full minute. In the end, Father Wang saw that the boundless sword qi on General Yi's sword hilt had already disappeared, and so had General Yi's boundless form. He reappeared at the villa's entrance, sweating profusely as he panted heavily. That sword strike just now had consumed a lot of General Yi's energy. It was his ultimate killing move, and he could only use it once in a short period of time. But even so, it was already shocking enough. Father Wang felt that thanks to the head of state today, he had indeed collected very good battle material. If he could adapt this scene just now into a novel, it would be a great battle scene. But then again, Father Wang was actually a little curious. In terms of visual effect, General Yi's sword strike just now was indeed impeccable as an ultimate killing move. But in terms of power, Father Wang was very curious about which was more ferocious, this sword strike or Wang Ling's slap. After this sword strike, General Yi seemed to collapse from exhaustion, and he panted on the spot for a long while before turning around. The more awkward thing was that General Yi hadn't brought any spirit energy replenishing elixirs with him on this trip. Although the self-recovery ability of a true immortal was very strong, and they only needed to adjust their breathing to replenish the spiritual power that they lost after casting a spell, when their blue bar was suddenly depleted, the recovery period would be a bit long. The key problem was that this was an era of peace and there was no war. General E had never dreamed that there would be a day when he would have to unleash his ultimate move. Gazing at the villa in front of him, General E couldn't help falling into deep thought. Until now, he still hadn't completely figured out who on earth this mysterious expert was. But looking at the means this mysterious expert had just used, General E felt that this matter had to be taken seriously. As long as they were in Huaxiao Nation, cultivators at the Golden Core stage and above had to report to the local Huaxiao Alliance branch, which would then compile the data and send it to headquarters on an annual basis. For cultivators at the Soul Formation stage and above, Huaxiao Alliance had to be even more precise about their identities. Otherwise, they would be unregistered residents and would be restricted wherever they went. Given the strength of this mysterious expert inside, General E felt that it was very likely that this person was an illegal immigrant. This matter would probably have to be reported to the head of state and let the head of state handle it. At this thought, General E already had a vague idea in his mind. At this time, a voice came into his ears. It was the voice of the mysterious master, as expected of the Sword Saint. That limitless sword chi really opened my eyes. General E frowned deeply. You already knew my identity, yet you still dared to be so heavy-handed. Do you really think you can do whatever you want just because you have some strength? I'm very sorry. The mysterious expert smiled. You can do whatever you want if you have strength. The corners of General Yi's mouth twitched. Don't, you're going too far, this tone was too arrogant. He was a Grand Blade Master, one of the 10 founding generals of Huaxiao Nation, a founding elder of the nation, but he had actually suffered a setback in front of an unknown person, which made him feel exceptionally uncomfortable. In the study, after seeing General Yi's expression change, Father Wang also hurriedly said, Your Excellency, should we invite General Yi in? To be honest, Father Wang really felt that General Yi was a little miserable. However, the head of state chuckled playfully. Brother Situ, don't you think little Yi is very interesting? I haven't had enough fun yet. Father Wang, I've always wanted to know the truth about the legacy of Limitless Sword Dao. Aren't you curious about it, Brother Situ? The head of state said, I know that this involves the secret of Limitless Sword Dao, and little Yi didn't want to tell me about it because he was following his Shifu's orders. But the truth is that I've always been puzzled by Fan Rui's death. Does Your Excellency think that Sword Immortal is still hiding a secret? That's right. Princeps nodded. Even if enlightening the stubborn disciple was one of the reasons why he chose to die, a few minutes later, the head of state once again negotiated with General Yi, who was standing outside the villa door. If I reveal my identity to you without reservation, are you willing to exchange a secret with me? As soon as the head of state said this, Father Wang immediately knew that the head of state was playing tricks again. General Yi snorted. If I wanted to investigate you, the head of state wasn't afraid at all as he chuckled. If you could find me, would you need to go through so much trouble? I can assure you that as long as I want, you might never know who I am for the rest of your life. General Yi was hit where it hurt, because this was indeed the case. Until now, he had only heard the voice of the mysterious man in the villa, but hadn't seen him. Even in a fight, he had lost the initiative. Given the current situation, he was at a complete disadvantage. Furthermore, if there was another conflict later, given the current lack of spirit energy in his body, he might very well be beaten to a pulp. Thinking this, General Yi sighed. How can I be sure that what you say is the truth? At the moment, General Yi felt that the most important thing was to know the ins and outs of this mysterious expert. I swear on Heavenly Tao that everything I say is true. If I'm lying in the slightest, I'll never be happy. Hearing this, General Yi was blank. It turned out that this was a ruthless person. General Yi, what secret do you want to know? The head of state said, I want to know why Sword Immortal passed on Limitless Sword Dao to you back then. Just this. Just this. Ha, I was wondering what it was. The head of state raised an eyebrow. So, you're willing to tell me about it? It's just a small matter. General Yi waved his hand. Back then, I was too shy to open my mouth, so I told the outside world that it was a secret. Now, I'm no longer afraid. It's fine if you want to know, I'll tell you. The inheritor of limitless sword Dao has a very important element, and that is, he must be a pure person, General Yi said. The head of state, so? General Yi, so, this old man is a virgin. Do you understand? The head of state. Chapter 703. General Yi's answer could be said to be unexpected, but also reasonable. Actually, with this explanation, the head of state immediately realized that a lot of the things that had happened to General Yi before that he couldn't explain could now be explained. No wonder when he had recommended General Yi to participate in the dating show, Harassment If You Are Not Sincere, General Yi had refused to go no matter what. It turned out that this was to perfectly continue Boundless Sword Dao. After confessing his secret, General Yi chuckled and stood at the entrance of the villa with a smug expression on his face. Your Excellency, can you come out now? While you're at it, make your identity clear. This is our agreement. On the other side, the head of state was already standing behind the door. Open the door. General Yi straightened his clothes, then floated over and opened the door. In the end, the person standing in front of him completely dumbfounded him. Yuan, head of state. Okay, it turned out that the person he had just been fighting with was the head of state. General Yi instantly felt like a mouthful of blood was stuck in his chest and he couldn't spit it out. Wait, was he opening the door the wrong way? General Yi closed the door with a bang and then opened it again. Okay, he had confirmed that this person was without a doubt the head of state himself. It was impossible to impersonate him. He was very familiar with the head of state's aura. Leader, why are you here? Almost instantly, General Yi straightened up and didn't even float as he straightened his feet on the ground and scratched the back of his head with an embarrassed expression. Not far away, the driver in the car and the people in the supply truck behind had startled expressions on their faces. From their angle, they couldn't see who exactly was standing on the other side of the door, but there really weren't many people who could make General Yi talk to them with their feet on the ground. The head of state chuckled. It's a long story, we can talk about it inside. General Yi nodded weakly. Very well, Your Excellency head of state. Also, about what happened just now, don't worry, it won't spread outside this villa, the head of state said. Princeps said, secondly, I also have to apologize. This time, I took the opportunity to secretly test you, little Yi. I even had some suspicions about you previously. What did Your Excellency suspect me of? Hearing this, General Yi couldn't help breaking out in a cold sweat. Previously, I introduced so many beautiful old ladies to you, but you didn't like any of them. I've actually been wondering if there's something wrong with your sexual orientation. But from what I've gathered, it seems that you're still following your master's orders. That's why you've compromised. Saying this, the head of state patted General Yi on the shoulder and sighed deeply. Little Yi, it's been hard on you all these years. For some reason, General Yi's eyes couldn't help tearing up when he heard this. It was Teacher Pan's chemistry class in the afternoon. Because Teacher Pan had asked for leave today, Old Antique was substituting for her. But Old Antique didn't take this opportunity to attend his history class, because he had already calculated the course schedule. He preferred to teach at his own pace and wouldn't take up extra class time. Old Antique would talk about something else when he suddenly had extra time like this. The summer camp and final exams were just around the corner, so he could use this extra time to talk about these two issues. The final exams were over, and the rest of the semester was over. It was only then that a lot of people realized that in the blink of an eye, there was only half a semester left in Year 1, the tough days of Year 2 were coming. Compared with Year 1, Year 2 was much more tiring. If you wanted to relax in Year 3, it was very important to lay a good foundation in Year 2. And most importantly, in Year 2, you had to be divided into classes again based on your results in the semester exams. Almost every year, there would be students in the elite classes who would be replaced by students in the regular or remedial classes because their grades in Year 1 weren't very good. Although it was an extremely rare occurrence, it was absolutely humiliating to be demoted from the elite classes. Old Antique propped one elbow on the dais and said very earnestly, "Actually, our grades are pretty stable, and there aren't any particularly bad kids." Although Old Pan said when you entered school that you were the worst batch of students she had ever taught. Everyone, speaking up to this point, Old Antique changed the subject. "Of course, the most stable one among us is still student Wang Ling, who narrowly escaped death." A lot of people couldn't help looking at Wang Ling, Old Antique. Student Wang Ling's grades are almost always in the middle of the class. If he's not 7th, he's 8th. There's only one word to describe him: stable. Teacher Pan even gave student Wang Ling a nickname in the office: Wang Zhengwen. Wang Ling, actually, as long as everyone can perform as steadily as student Wang Ling in the Year 2 entrance exam, no one will be transferred away. Old Antique said this with a little teasing tone. "If any of you are transferred away, I'll give you a 50% discount when you come to my snack shop in the future." After Old Antique said this, the students in class roared with laughter as they looked at him. Of course, it was still a little early to talk about this topic. After all, there was still half a semester left. If they hadn't worked hard in the first half of the semester, they could still be happy in Year 2 if they worked hard in the remaining half of the semester. After that, Old Antique very quickly changed the topic to a cliché: summer homework. Old Antique said slowly, "This year's summer homework for all of you is a little difficult. But I believe that all of you will definitely be able to complete it." Of course, the summer homework Old Antique was talking about wasn't just simple homework. Foundation Establishment High School's summer homework was fundamentally different from that of ordinary high schools. Based on the experience of the seniors who had graduated from number 60 high school in previous years, it was more or less a few people working together to work out a research project on cultivation and do experiments. Thus, when Old Antique said this, everyone basically had an idea in their hearts. It was just that this year's summer homework wasn't as simple as just a research project. Considering how rampant criminals have been recently, all the teachers in our number 60 high school have voted and decided that this year's summer homework will be development of a killer technique. This is a project for each person to research independently, and can't be carried out in a team. Simply put, it's to design a killer move for yourself. When he said this, Old Antique narrowed his eyes mysteriously. Chapter 704. Originally, this project was usually carried out in the second year of high school, but considering various factors, we've decided to bring it forward a little. To a certain extent, it will improve everyone's ability to defend themselves, Old Antique said. Thus, during this summer break, everyone must combine the attributes of their spirit roots and the spells they are good at to design a sure-kill survival technique for themselves. This was an extra exam that all high school students had to complete regarding the training of a sure-kill technique. Furthermore, the overall score would be recorded in the overall score of the college entrance examination, and would account for 5% of the total score. It might seem like a very small percentage, but this 5% often played a very critical role in the cultivation college entrance examination. How did the saying go? For cultivators, the college entrance examination was like a mighty army crowding a bridge. Sometimes, a little bit of a grade would prevent you from getting into the university you liked. But Wang Ling didn't care whether or not he could get into the university he liked, he just wanted to find a place where he could go to university safely. Because the sure-kill technique had something to do with the college entrance examination, Old Antique's expression turned a lot more serious. You can start thinking about the design of your sure-kill technique during this summer camp. At your current stage, a sure-kill technique doesn't mean that it's a very powerful skill. So in the evaluation of this sure-kill technique, we'll start from 3 aspects: skill, survival and power, based on the overall quality of this self-created sure-kill technique. When Old Antique said this, there was instantly a lot of discussion in the class. Creating a sure-kill technique was a very profound field of study, and designing a sure-kill technique suitable for oneself wasn't an easy task. Currently, it was permissible to use the operating principles of other spells as a reference for a sure-kill technique at the senior high level. There were two problems that needed to be taken into consideration. One was the spirit root. The strength of a spell largely depended on the attribute of the spirit root. For example, those with a fire spirit root were born with a natural gift for strength, while those with a water spirit root had a strong self-healing and recovery ability. Those with a wood spirit root had a natural advantage in terms of spell damage, while those with an earth spirit root had a much stronger sense of nature, while those with a metal spirit root had a solid defense. In fact, a lot of people knew this concept. Thus, when choosing a spell, it was important to choose a spell that was most suitable for your spirit root. Of course, the 3,000 great Daos transcended the 5 elements. When Old Antique had brought this up, Wang Ling had started to ponder how on earth he should design this spell in a way that made it appear low-key and unpretentious, which was yet another huge problem for him. Since everyone's spiritual roots are different, before the summer camp officially begins, the school will arrange a unified test for everyone. Everyone can clearly see the proportion of the 5 elements in your spiritual roots. At that moment, Old Antique brought up another point, which was the proportion of the 5 elements in the spirit root. People with single attribute spiritual roots were naturally more popular, because when choosing a spell, they could focus on one attribute. The rest were those with dual attributes, 3 attributes, and even 4 or 5 attributes. If it was only dual attributes, it would be fine, but the most frightening thing was to encounter a mix of 5 attributes, and none of the attributes were particularly prominent. Wang Ling himself had a 5-element spirit root, but it wasn't a mixed one. Wang Ling was born with 5 perfect spirit roots. He could freely adjust the proportion of the 5 elements in his body to achieve the desired result. In Wang Ling's view, this was actually an advantage, because there were a lot more spells to choose from. Generally speaking, the element that attracted the least attention was the metal element. This was a type of spirit root that was symbolic of defensive spirit roots. Basically, most of the metal spells focused on defense. While Wang Ling was pondering this, Old Antique raised his hand and handed out a stack of booklets. "What's this?" someone asked. Although it's not as difficult as creating an original spell, it's still not easy to design a sure-kill technique based on the working principles of other spells. This booklet contains the design ideas for some of your seniors from the previous batch. Old Antique smiled. The highest grade among the last batch of number 60 high graduates was S, which translates to nearly 200 points. 200 points. Why so many? Little Peanut exclaimed. Because the design of this sure-kill technique is more holistic. First of all, it's skill. That senior made full use of the characteristics of his fire spirit root, and combined 3 kinds of fire spells to create a derivative spell called Dead Sea of Dry Fire, from which the skill score is already very high. Second is the survival score and the power score. In terms of survival, when this spell is cast, it can effectively block an enemy's attack and form thick smoke that can resist ordinary eye techniques. As for the final power score, by combining 3 kinds of fire spells, plus the fact that this senior is a cultivator with a fire spirit root, the power score is directly full. Little Peanut did a rough calculation of the points, and then scratched his head. "Teacher, that's not right." Even so, it's impossible to get 200 points. Of course, the reason why this senior was able to get such a high score was actually because he had additional points. At that time, this senior's spell design was plagiarized by someone from another school, and in the end, the headmaster approved it and decided to give this senior some additional points as consolation, Old Antique explained. Someone stole it. The students in class were shocked. This society is more complicated than you think. Old Antique's lips curled. The student who plagiarized the design was surnamed Li, and was called Li Yuanjie. You can probably find this out if you look it up online. At that time, according to your senior's design, Student Li switched the order of the 3 spells used in the Dead Sea of Dry Flames spell and designed the spell, Sorrow of Parting Fire. But unfortunately, this student Li Yuanjie's skills weren't good enough. He didn't understand the basic principles of the spell at all. The spells that we are going to design in the end are spells that are derived from the operating principles of existing spells, but this student Li Yuanjie just changed the order of 3 of the original spells and copied everything else. In the end, the sorrow of leaving fire that he designed was nondescript and full of loopholes. So, teacher is here to remind all of you. You have to use your own brain and hands to design a derivative sure kill spell. Don't plagiarize someone else's work, and at the same time, protect your own work. I heard that this student Li Yuanjie has now changed his name to a foreign one. After graduation, he will continue to use this method to swindle people outside, claiming that he is an original sorcerer. A foreign name? That's right. Old Antique nodded. His name is Li, Ghost Judgment Yuanjie. Chapter 705. Nowadays, there were too many shameless people to count. Wang Ling was already used to them. For example, Dean's Shadow Fool, who had stolen Father Wang's song a few days ago. Wang Ling heard that this guy was already half dead. Father Wang hadn't chosen to directly kill him, but had instead chosen to thoroughly ruin his reputation by boiling him like a frog in warm water. In the magic circle, original and derivative spells, as well as plagiarized and stolen spells, had always been the focus of attention. Take the Cultivation Forum, run by Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal as an example. Every day, there would be a large number of posts asking for help in identifying similar spells. The most difficult part of an original spell was the theory of operation. Once you had the theory, you had to go through step-by-step experiments to turn the theory into a feasible operating formula. The birth of an original spell could take a cultivator hundreds or even thousands of years of hard work. Of course, there were some exceptionally talented people who could complete their research in decades, but in the end, they were in the minority. After the original spell was completed, they could submit an application to the Cultivation Skills Library on Huaxiao Alliance's official website for the copyright of the original spell to protect their rights and interests. After this step, the creator of the original cultivation method would be able to obtain subsequent profits through the cultivator's skill stores on the internet, which Buttface had logged on to before, in the form of authorization sharing. As for derivative spells, all derivative spells were modified based on the basic operation theory of one or more spells. This time, they needed to complete the sure kill spell design, which was a derivative spell. In terms of copyright, as long as the derivative spell was completed, the source of the original spell, its operating theory, and its creator were clearly stated, and it wasn't sold commercially, then it wouldn't constitute infringement. However, there were some people in the magic circle who liked to plagiarize and steal, branding themselves as original spell sorcerers, and swindling people everywhere. Wang Ling felt that there were more and more spell copyright disputes nowadays, and a large part of the reason had to do with modern cultivators' utilitarianism. Nowadays, there were fewer and fewer cultivators who were willing to devote themselves to studying spells, and many cultivators were starting to become impatient. In today's relatively peaceful cultivation era, without the clamor and killing of various clans and schools of thought contending for supremacy, more and more cultivators were obsessed with creating wealth, to the extent that they didn't hesitate to use some rather dirty methods. As for the identification of those who plagiarized original spells, it was also a big problem at the moment, because there were still too few professional magic infringement identification experts, and the relevant system was not perfect. Actually, Wang Ling had noticed this a long time ago, but he hadn't been able to solve this problem very well. But in recent years, the anti-plagiarism trend among cultivators had become more and more prevalent. In reality, all spells were derived from the 3,000 Great Daos. In the eyes of some people, the high-grade magic spells that they covet like ducks might only be a small branch of the 3,000 Great Daos. But Wang Ling wasn't in the mood to expose this, because even if he did, there might not be anyone who would listen. He could say it, but there was no need. When school ended in the afternoon, a few boys in the class took out their phones and created a discussion group. This group was used to discuss the design of killing moves. On the one hand, they had been living and studying together for half a semester, so they were quite familiar with each other's situations. On the other hand, in some sense, if you weren't a particularly talented person when it came to spell design in high school, it was more scientific and efficient to find someone to discuss it in a group. While Dopigua, Super Chen and Little Peanut were creating the group, Dopigua turned his gaze to Wang Ling. Wang Ling, what are you spacing out for? Join the group. After thinking for a bit, Wang Ling still took out his phone. He couldn't help it, this was a result of the environment. If he didn't join the group and completed the spell on his own, he would most likely become the center of attention again. But to be honest, although Wang Ling had a lot to choose from, he really hadn't thought of a spell that was suitable for him. At the moment, he just had a general direction, and it would be best to use the most unconventional metal spell as his main line of thought. And so, Wang Ling joined the group. He was quite curious to know what constructive suggestions this group had. Dopigua's train of thought was very clear. Gripping his phone, he looked as if he had foreseen everything. Here's the specific plan: everyone can add the attribute of their spirit root in front of their nicknames in the group. It doesn't matter if you don't know what your spirit root is, in any case, the school will do a test in a few days. And then? Asked Little Peanut. Dopigua said with a straight face, draw lots. Wang Ling understood. This was how they would draw lots to determine the order in which they would study the spells. Brainstorming would help one person complete the general design of a sure-kill technique first, and then help the next person perfect it according to the sequence. It was actually pretty fair. Saying this, Dopigua opened a lottery software, and each time he clicked on it, a random number would be drawn from 1 to 4. The first person to draw lots was Little Peanut, who drew a 4. Dopigua was number 2. Super Chen was number 3. The first person to draw lots was Wang Ling. Wang Ling, alright, Wang Ling is first, everyone help Wang Ling think first, said Dopigua. To be honest, Super Chen was a little surprised. He hadn't expected Wang Ling's spirit root to actually be the relatively conservative metal attribute. How did the saying go? Silence is gold. Little Peanut lowered his head and pondered for a while before saying, generally speaking, spells that are more compatible with the metal attribute can use fire as a secondary spell. Student Wang Ling can choose a metal spell as his primary spell, and combine it with a fire spell as a secondary spell to combine the two spells. Dopigua, but it feels like there aren't many choices for the metal attribute as his main spell. The main thing is that we don't know what metal spells Wang Ling has mastered yet. There's no rush. Super Chen had a different opinion. Even if Wang Ling doesn't know them, he can learn them now. We're still at the design stage, and it's still early for the official Grade 2 assessment. There's still a long time to get used to it. That's true. Dopigua nodded. How about this, let's check it out. My uncle's company has developed software that can match the most compatible spells from the skill library. Wang Ling listened very carefully to their analysis, and when he saw Dopigua open the matching software, he also leaned over. After inputting data on his height, weight, realm, attribute of his spirit root, as well as his daily personality and other aspects, the software automatically recommended the following skills: Grade 2 spell, Free Golden Monkey, a metal type enhancement spell that focuses on strengthening the limbs and turns them into a golden monkey. When used, speed and agility will be greatly increased, making it easy to escape. From Journey to the West, Conquering the Magic Scroll, Grade 2 spell, Canopy Metal Shattering Roar, a metal-type sound wave spell that uses the strengthened vocal cords to release a powerful roar that can shatter metal and split rocks. It causes a temporary dizziness, making it easy to escape. From Journey to the West, Conquering the Magic Scroll, Super Chen shook his head when he saw this. That won't do. Wang Ling usually doesn't speak. Wang Ling, Dopigua, don't worry, keep reading. There's also a secondary fire spell. Furthermore, if you combine these 3 spells, it might not necessarily be a sound wave spell. Wang Ling replied with a and continued to read. The third recommended spell, Grade 1 spell, Blazing Sky, a fire-type obstacle spell that uses spirit chi as a medium to ignite the air to create a huge amount of smoke, which is used for escaping. From Zhurong Spirit Scroll, Wang Ling, Little Peanut, why are they all about escaping? This is the limitation of metal-type spells. Metal-type spells are mostly defensive spells. Dopigwa sighed. Super Chin nodded. But I feel that after combining them, the name will sound pretty good. What's it called? Blazing Sky Playing with Pigs and Monkeys. Chapter 706. In the last 2 days, there was one more person in grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's villa. It was the incarnation of the weapon spirit of the Wuji umbrella, the girl called Wuji. In theory, weapon spirits didn't need to eat, but what made grenade-throwing Senior Immortal very happy was that Wuji loved broccoli very much. It was July 27th on Thursday in the 14th week of the semester. Wuji happily ate 2 large bowls of assorted broccoli salad on the table. Her body was covered in bandages, and she only tore off the lower half when she ate. Although her face couldn't be seen clearly, just from the lower half of her face, it was obvious that she was a very beautiful girl. Are the other holy beasts really gone? Little Silver cupped his chin and stared at Wuji. Wuji sighed and put down the broccoli fork in her hand. This is the 302nd time you've asked this question in the last 2 days. I can tell you with certainty that since I was created, you're the only living holy beast that I've sensed. Could it be that you missed something? That's impossible. Wuji shook her head quickly like a rattle. You should know that I'm a spatial magic weapon to begin with. Since I was created, I've been shuttling around with that President Bai, and I've never sensed the aura of other holy beasts. But as soon as I came to Songhai City, I smelled Mr. Silver. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal nodded. He believed what Wuji said. Although this girl had been a little resistant at the beginning, in the end, she couldn't stand the 10 flames of purification that Wang Ling had stored in the soul suppression ring. Wuji had seen his prowess, so she feared this thing from the bottom of her heart. She didn't know what on earth these flames of purification were, but they sounded really powerful. As long as she was touched by them, wouldn't she be reduced to ashes? Thus, as Wuji spoke, her eyes were nervously fixed on grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's ring. In this case, it was even more impossible for her to lie. Of course, it wasn't that grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't understand Little Silver's repeated questions these 2 days. Little Silver was very simple-minded, and had always been under the illusion that even if there was another holy beast in the world, holy beasts weren't truly extinct. But now, faced with this cruel reality, Little Silver really couldn't accept it. So he kept asking Wuji the same question. Wuji thought for a bit, then finally said to Little Silver, "Of course, Mr. Silver, don't be too discouraged. There are also places that I can't monitor, such as the Demon Realm or the Outer Realm. If there are any surviving holy beasts that run to the Demon Realm or leave Earth, it's impossible for me to monitor them." This was actually a consolation, but after saying it, Wuji felt that Little Silver was even more pitiful. Then was President Bai really behind the extinction of the holy beasts back then? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal asked. Wuji nodded, yes, he is the mastermind. However, I only know a little about this matter because I was created after that massacre. And the person who had created it was that elder Ji Xing. What a pity, it's all because I'm young and insensible, that's why I succumbed to their tyranny. At this point, Wuji gritted his teeth in anger. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, of course, if I can increase the range of my spatial detection, I might be able to find other places. Moreover, I have a very strong intuition. Speaking up to this point, Wuji had a very mysterious look in his eyes. I think there's definitely a secret in Beast King's remains. If you want me to monitor it again, I can monitor the Demon Realm, Beast King's remains, the Outer Milky Way. If I can upgrade it again, I can monitor an entire planet. The corners of grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's mouth twitched. Outer Milky Way, is it? This place was boundlessly vast. Even if Wuji's monitoring range could be increased to the size of a planet, there were trillions of planets in the outer Milky Way, and counting them one by one would really kill him. This was a pretty far-fetched idea. In contrast, grenade-throwing senior immortal felt that it might be more convenient to search for clues in Devil Valley. One of the most important reasons why the holy beasts had been wiped out back then was the death of Devil King, the king of holy beasts. Devil King was super lethargic and couldn't be moved by anything. For a previous story, see chapter 538, King of Holy Beasts, Devil King. At that time, Devil King had been stewed in its sleep and turned into a pot of broth. Of course, this matter hadn't been verified, and there wasn't enough evidence to show that Devil King had really been stewed to death. However, there had been no trace of Devil King in the last few years, and it was hard to tell whether the news was true or false. I have a hunch that there's definitely a secret about Devil King in Devil Valley, Wuji said very seriously. I've had the same dream before, about Beast King's remains. Although I didn't see it very clearly, there's definitely something inside. You have to believe in a woman's intuition. Grenade-throwing senior immortal. Although Wuji was currently in the form of a young girl, the forms that artifact spirits took were based on their master's wishes, and the forms they took were the most ideal in their first master's heart. Grenade-throwing senior immortal, Wuji, theoretically speaking, artifact spirits don't have a gender. Impossible. Wuji touched her lower body to confirm her gender again. I don't have a little XX. Grenade-throwing senior immortal. Grenade-throwing senior immortal didn't want to talk nonsense, and said, then do you have a way to expand the range of surveillance? Of course. Wuji replied. You should all know that in order to create me, this deranged Baija collected a total of 49 holy beast skins. He only needed one more to complete the collection. As long as I can collect the last one, I'll be able to level up. Saying this, Wuji turned to look at Little Silver on the side, who felt his hair stand on end. Damn, what do you want to do to me? Wuji, actually, I don't need too much. Mr. Silver just needs to cut me a little bit. Little Silver, no way. My whole body is master's. Grenade-throwing senior immortal, Wuji spread her hands. Then there's no other way. Of course, it's also possible to find Devil King. The skin of the king of holy beasts is a jack of all trades, it's no problem to synthesize it. Grenade-throwing senior immortal rubbed his brow, feeling a headache coming on, and then asked, as long as it's Little Silver's skin? Wuji thought for a moment, then nodded. That's right. Grenade-throwing senior immortal looked at Little Silver with a smile on his face. Brother Silver, from today on, you can pick your feet and save the skin. Little Silver. Chapter 707. It was July 28 on Friday in the 14th week of the semester. After school, Wang Ling hurried back to his room. He was preparing something for Wang Ming's birthday. He had actually been thinking about it for a long time, but hadn't figured out what on earth to give Wang Ming. Wang Ming's birthday was on August 1st, Army Day, which also happened to be the day of the summer camp. There would definitely be a lot of trouble with the school's trip to Beast King's remains this time, so Wang Ling decided to first deal with the most important issue of gift-giving before thinking about the rest. In the end, he still had to deal with things one by one. Birthday gift, final exams, summer camp, the mysterious Kun Belly girl who was currently undergoing treatment at Immortal Toya's place, as well as the identity of the mysterious angler behind the scenes, all of these troublesome matters had to be dealt with one by one. It was best to give a gift in line with the recipient's wishes, which was the most difficult part. Wang Ling knew that Wang Ming was a very prideful person, so he had to be careful with what he gave him and not touch Wang Ming's bottom line. For example, while Wang Ming was exceptionally obsessed with cultivation, Wang Ling actually had a lot of unorthodox ways to help him embark on the path of cultivation. Unfortunately, Wang Ming himself wouldn't accept them at all. Wang Ling remembered very clearly that a few years ago, Wang Ming had confidently patted his chest and said that sooner or later, he would open up a path of his own. Even if he was a natural muggle and just an ordinary person, he would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the most powerful cultivators in the world. Thus, he could basically dispense with cultivation magic artifacts. Wang Ling had initially wanted to use the 3 emotion stones left over from making the 3 views shattering hammer to make a permanent armor for Wang Ming, but after careful consideration, Wang Ling immediately felt that this plan wasn't very reliable. Because in comparison, Wang Ming would definitely rather use a rechargeable magic treasure that he had developed himself. After the incident with Old Antique and Shuego sect, Wang Ming had modified the heavenly materials sword that he had taken back from the master of Immortal Mansion Qingyu. The sword was much lighter, and it could be used for up to half a month after being recharged. The most important thing was that it was very fast, and only needed 4 hours to completely recharge. In addition, Wang Ming had also added a device to the hilt to display the percentage of spirit energy. It could be said that the entire heavenly materials sword had already been modified by Wang Ming to resemble modern cultivation science. The most frightening thing was that not only had the heavenly materials sword's effectiveness not decreased, it had instead increased. Originally, the heavenly materials sword had a powerful ability to seal spirits. As long as the heavenly materials sword stabbed someone, even if it was just the tiniest bit of skin, the sealing ability would immediately take effect. During the Shuego sect incident, Wang Ming had once used the heavenly materials sword to subdue a nascent soul cultivator. That nascent soul cultivator hadn't been able to put up the slightest bit of resistance in the face of the heavenly materials sword, which was enough to prove how powerful it was. After all, this was a magic sword that the master of Immortal Mansion had spent nearly 100 years of painstaking effort to forge. At one point, he had even wanted to seize Jinka to extract its sword spirit and inject it into the heavenly materials sword. Unfortunately, the master of Immortal Mansion's scheme didn't succeed. The only flaw in the heavenly materials sword was that it had yet to form a sword spirit. So at this thought, Wang Ling already had an idea. Moreover, compared to giving a magic tool, giving a sword spirit was indeed a good idea. When necessary, the sword spirit could be Wang Ming's bodyguard, and he could also call 120 at any time. If Wang Ming accidentally ate Jia Yin's food one day and couldn't recover, with the sword spirit by his side, he would definitely be able to save his life. However, the formation of a sword spirit wasn't something that could be formed overnight. Furthermore, in a situation where Wang Ming couldn't circulate his spirit energy on his own, it was absolutely impossible to cultivate a sword spirit by relying solely on ordinary spirit energy. But this didn't mean that Wang Ming couldn't have a sword spirit. There were currently a lot of mass-produced branded spirit swords on the market which all had their own sword spirits. Some of these sword spirits were artificially produced, while others were naturally bred through industrial means. As long as they met the lowest industry standards, they could be sold publicly. If a spirit sword was produced by industrial means, its appearance would basically be the same, and one could tell at a glance. As for the sword spirits that were born naturally, when they were summoned for the first time, their appearance would automatically change into the appearance that the sword master most desired. In fact, this concept was not much different from the concept of a tool spirit, because a sword spirit itself was also a kind of tool spirit. As for how to help Wang Ming form a sword spirit in the heavenly materials sword, he would have to ask the heavenly Tao to make arrangements. This was the 3rd time this month that Wang Ling had summoned the heavenly Tao through the equivalent exchange array. This was more frequent than in previous years. When Wang Ling was young, the heavenly Tao had been eager to make a deal with him. Now, the heavenly Tao was very afraid that Wang Ling would make a deal with it. Of course, if it was Wang Ling's handwritten letter, the heavenly Tao would still be very happy to trade, but what if it was crispy noodle snacks? And the most frightening thing was that no matter what Wang Ling offered in exchange, the heavenly Tao didn't have the power to refuse, because the array itself was an equivalent exchange. As the person who had the right to summon the heavenly Tao, Wang Ling could offer anything at his disposal in exchange. Crispy noodle snacks would work too, even if what Wang Ling needed was a little special. As long as he had enough crispy noodle snacks, he could trade for it. When Wang Ling summoned the heavenly Tao once again with the refinement array, the 3 inches astonishing man, who was the embodiment of heavenly Tao, was directly alarmed. "Why are you here again?" The golden 3-inch man was silent for a moment, a few drops of cold sweat rolling down his forehead. A few minutes later, the golden 3-inch man accepted reality. The golden 3-inch man, "What do you want?" Sword Spirit. Wang Ling stared at the golden 3-inch man embodiment of heavenly Tao and spoke telepathically. Sword Spirit. The golden 3-inch man was blank for a moment, then asked, "Where's the sword?" For the heavenly Tao, a sword spirit actually wasn't anything special, because it was born naturally. The most important thing was that all weapon spirits were created by heavenly Tao, but they were only a very small part of the vast heavenly Tao system. As long as the golden 3-inch man wanted to, he could even custom make a sword spirit for himself. Wang Ling, it's not my sword. You'll have to make the arrangements. The golden 3-inch man, Wang Ling asked telepathically, can't I? The golden 3-inch man, it's not that I can't, if it's not your sword, this deal will be a little expensive. Expensive? Wang Ling cupped his chin in contemplation, his voice trembling. How many crispy noodle snacks? Chapter 708. Cultivating a sword spirit wasn't something that could be done overnight. Although the heavenly Tao believed that it could indeed arrange it, using crispy noodle snacks as a trade was really a little. After all, the heavenly Tao didn't have the right to refuse Wang Ling, anything Wang Ling had could be exchanged. Furthermore, the heavenly Tao couldn't make any comments. He couldn't say what he wanted or didn't want. This was also one of the hard and fast conditions in an equivalent exchange. But the key point was that this youngster didn't realize that he didn't want crispy noodle snacks, thus, when Wang Ling took out a box of custom-made baked gluten-flavored crispy noodle snacks, the heavenly Tao incarnation of the golden 3-inch man suddenly felt like crying but had no tears to shed. He was absolutely certain that his first trade with the young Wang Ling back then had been purely because his brain had short-circuited. This was a sin. The golden 3-inch man stared at the box of crispy noodle snacks, took a deep breath, and then directly put the box away. Wang Ling's heart twitched at this scene. He never thought that this birthday present would actually cost him a box of custom-made crispy noodle snacks, a box of 24 packets. Although he had already opened this box, he hadn't eaten a single one yet. Wang Ling stared at the heavenly Tao inside. Sure enough, it was said that the heavenly Tao was heartless, and it looked like it wasn't without reason. After accepting the crispy noodle snacks, the golden 3-inch man stared at Wang Ling. The trade is complete, everything is as you wish, the sword spirit of that sword will be infused into the heavenly materials sword on August 1st this year as agreed. But whether or not he can summon the sword spirit will depend on his own luck. Wang Ling nodded his head. The truth was that he had already helped Wang Ming achieve the most difficult step, which was to form a sword spirit. But whether or not he could summon the sword spirit would depend on Wang Ming's own will. The sword spirit's first summon would only appear when the sword master needed it the most, elsewhere, at the entry point for overseas personnel at Shanghai International Airport. A blonde, blue-eyed young man with his hair combed like an adult and dressed in a handsome suit stood on the monitoring platform with his arms outstretched. The customs lady in charge of testing dangerous goods checked his arms and trousers one by one to see if there were any dangerous goods. According to the regulations of the International Cultivators Space Transportation Law, as long as a cultivator was riding a large-scale flying magical equipment, they were not allowed to carry any spatial storage-type magical equipment with them. Even the pockets of their clothes and pants that had a separate storage space were not allowed. After confirming that there was nothing in the young man's clothes and pants, the customs lady used a black metal detector to probe the young man's body. The detector did not show any abnormalities. Your inspection is really strict. The blonde youth smiled in a gentlemanly manner and passed through the virus detection gate under the guidance of the customs lady. This was an intelligent virus quarantine magic treasure which had been developed by Huaxiao Nation's Academy of Cultivation and Magic Treasures. It could detect whether overseas cultivators were carrying foreign viruses. The young man walked past the gate, and the gate lit up with a green light. At this time, the customs officer stamped the passport and returned it to the young man with a smile. Mr. Han Di, I wish you a pleasant journey. Thank you. The blonde youth put away his passport and put on a pair of sunglasses. Han Di. This was the alias second president of Night Chief, President Dylan, was using in Huaxiao Nation. After passing the customs security check, President Dylan's tense heart was instantly relieved. Because of that useless good-for-nothing Baizhe and the fact that Beast King's remains was about to open, Huaxiao Nation's customs checks were now very strict. If it hadn't been for someone else in Huaxiao Nation helping him arrange another identity as Han Di, he might not even have been able to get a visa to Huaxiao Nation. And this Han Di's identity wasn't fictitious, but real. When Night Ghost Spirit Emperor had asked President Dylan to take over the master plan a few days ago, President Dylan had already arranged for someone to prepare a new identity for him. This Han Di's real identity was the chairman of a vaccine company. He was an American-Chinese American who wielded great power and ran more than 20 vaccine testing companies at the same time. But unfortunately, a while ago, a vaccine produced by one of this Han Di's subsidiary companies had run into a major problem. Just like that, President Dylan had used this as leverage to take over this Han Di's identity. There hadn't been any problems with that batch of vaccines at first, but President Dylan had sent someone to tamper with the processing process. Vaccines were very important drugs, and if there were any problems with their safety or quality, this Mr. Han Di wouldn't be able to escape responsibility. Once Huaxiao Nation's Food and Drug Administration investigated this matter, compensation of several billion wouldn't be considered a lot. Most importantly, it was very likely that he would be sentenced to play mahjong with the old devil and the others for several hundred years. So this Mr. Han Di was afraid, and in the end, he voluntarily agreed to President Dylan's escape plan, gave up his identity, and fled to Huaxiao Nation with the money. But this Mr. Han Di didn't know that Night Chief's people were waiting for him in Huaxiao Nation. For Night Ghost Spirit Emperor, only a dead man would leave no evidence against him. As President Dylan strolled out of the airport, a black armed SUV stopped punctually at exit A3. President Dylan approached the car door, which opened on its own. After he got into the car, an overseas call directly rang President Dylan's cell phone. The caller ID on the number was an asterisk. President Dylan immediately picked up the call. Lord Spirit Emperor, I've arrived. Everything went according to plan. And as Lord Spirit Emperor expected, Huaxiao Nation's checks were extremely strict this time, President Dylan said. Since it went smoothly, that person can rest assured. Night Ghost Spirit Emperor said, is there enough manpower in Huaxiao Nation? Rest assured, Lord, I've contacted quite a few wandering cultivators through the underground dark network this time. They're all very strong, one of them isn't Ghost Head Blade. Speaking up to this point, President Dylan narrowed his eyes. The underground dark network he was talking about was a mysterious network set up by dark forces both at home and abroad. As long as you had the means to sneak in, you could post a notice on the dark network and hire some wandering dark cultivators. This was the fastest way to gather manpower given the current shortage of Huaxiao people. These wandering dark cultivators could be hired at a high price, but compared with the big plan, this money was nothing. What's the background of this Ghost Head Blade? Night Ghost Spirit Emperor's interest was piqued. This person is Numinous Mother's third disciple. I've already sent someone to verify this point. Although this person isn't listed on the killer list, he's proficient in the art of stealth and shifting forms, and can come and go like a ghost. I've already sent him to investigate the identity of that teenager's older brother. Night Ghost Spirit Emperor, are you confident? Lord Spirit Emperor, don't worry, I'm different from that good-for-nothing Baizhe. President Dylan curled his lips. I'll definitely have Ghost Head Blade capture that teenager's older brother alive in 7 days. Chapter 709. After ending the call, Night Ghost Spirit Emperor's frown instantly relaxed a lot. What he was most worried about was Huaxiao's customs. If they were stopped there, their master plan would definitely be affected. Taking the initiative to sneak into the remains this time was a very important factor. Huaxiao Nation's higher-ups would definitely send numerous experts to protect the remains. If they didn't seize this opportunity, the entire plan would be extremely difficult. But now that they had passed customs, Night Ghost Spirit Emperor was much more relieved. The only thing that was somewhat unexpected was the ghost head blade that Dylan had mentioned. He had never heard of this assassin's name before. Was he actually the third disciple of the legendary numinous mother with the axe? Night Ghost Spirit Emperor was extremely curious about this person's identity. What kind of person was numinous mother with ghost hatchet? This was a Grandmaster level killer, and it was said that his two disciples, Gorgeous Itinerant and Taoist Tao Tai, had only learned a little from him, but they had already reached the top and become two epic stars in the world of killers. Then who on earth was this ghost head blade? At Night Chief's headquarters, Night Ghost Spirit Emperor rested his head in his hands, looking like he was deep in thought. A moment later, he raised his head and looked at a staff member in the lab. Can you help me investigate Ghost Head Blade's background from the dark web? Sir Spiritual Venerable, please wait a moment. The worker nodded slightly. A few minutes later, a document on Ghost Head Blade was printed out and delivered to Night Ghost Spirit Emperor. After carefully reading the information, Night Ghost Spirit Emperor's eyes suddenly lit up. So that's what happened. July 31st, Monday in the 15th week of the semester. Planned by Huaxiao Alliance, personally approved by Secretary Dakang of the Alliance of 10,000 Schools, and led by the General Administration of 100 schools, the summer camp in Beast Kings Remains officially began. In the public square of Peiyuan District, several Foundation Establishment High School students who had been selected for this summer camp were driving buses to the side of the square. At 10 o'clock in the morning, there were over 1,000 Foundation Establishment students gathered here. Apart from that, there were also many teachers dressed in white Daoist robes standing at the side of the plaza, keeping the students in order. Huaxiao Alliance had personally selected these teachers to protect the team from different schools in Songhai City, and Huaxiao Alliance had arranged for them to wear the same Daoist robes. Their main task was to ensure the safety of the students on this trip. Headmaster Chen, Old Li, and Old Antique were all present at number 60 high school. Wang Ling heard that Teacher Pan was supposed to come as well, but because she was also teaching grade 3's Dao Talismans class, she had directly given up. Of course, this was just the security on the surface. Huaxiao Alliance's 10 generals and the humanoid magic treasure, head of State 001, which Huaxiao Alliance had developed, would also secretly protect them. Apart from that, there was also President Qi's remote planning. If necessary, the Heavenly E satellite could be mobilized at any time. The powerful protective formation looked as solid as an iron wall, but for some reason, Wang Ling still felt uneasy. He had a feeling that this trip would not go so smoothly, but not everyone shared Wang Ling's awareness. This is my first time seeing Huaxiao Alliance's Daoist robes. He's so cool. In the queue, someone couldn't help but take a photo and wanted to post it on his WeChat Moments to show off. However, this student's phone was quickly taken away by a black-faced teacher dressed in a snow-white Daoist robe. Didn't your school's teachers tell you that taking photos is prohibited throughout this summer camp? The student lowered his head and blushed. It was very clear that his school teachers had specifically told him about this before the activity. Devil Valley, Beast Kings Remains was originally a national-level protected secret land. In the past, only teams of experts personally approved by Huaxiao Alliance had the right to enter for inspection. This year, a group of senior grade 1 students had been specially allowed to enter. Apart from providing a smokescreen for foreign forces, it was also in fact a trial run by the Alliance of 10,000 schools. For many students nowadays, there were some things that couldn't be learned in class. Thus, this was indeed a very rare opportunity to cultivate. But according to the teacher's instructions before they set off, they could only observe with their eyes, listen with their ears, feel with their hearts, and remember with their brains. Nothing about the secret land was allowed to be disclosed to the outside world. It was very clear that not all the students were honest people. After taking away the first phone, the teacher asked several times in a row, "Is there anyone else with electronic devices? Hand them over." The whole crowd instantly fell silent. After a long while, the teacher smiled slightly, took out a U-shaped magnet from his lapel, and tossed it into the air. All the electronic devices that the students in the line had on them, cell phones, wristwatches, Walkmans, and even tablets, were sucked away by this magnet. After taking away the electronic devices, the teacher continued to organize the line as if nothing had happened. The rest of the teachers looked as if they were used to this sight. Among the teachers who led the team, there were always some who played the role of the bad guy. It was very clear that these teachers had already made preparations to deal with this group of senior grade 1 students who were psychologically rebellious. Are they that strict? Super Chin was startled, because his phone was one of the victims. You deserve it, I told you that you shouldn't have brought it, but you just wouldn't believe me. Dopigua's expression was as if he had foreseen everything. Before I came, I asked my uncle about it. A lot of the teachers leading the team this time were transferred over from Jinghua City. That black-faced one just now was one of them. Do you know Tianchi Imperial High? These words caught Wang Ling's attention, because Tianchi Imperial High was Fang Xing's school before he had transferred to number 60 High. Back then, after Immortal Shi Pai had been executed, Fang Xing had been directly sent to Tianchi Imperial High to study, and he had grown up there. On the surface, it was a school for the nobility, but as far as Wang Ling knew, even if you had the money, you might not be able to study here. The students inside weren't simple, and neither were the teachers. Furthermore, a large portion of the core members of the Society of Saints, which specialized in recruiting foundation establishment elites from all over the country, had come from Tianchi Imperial High. Roughly 10 minutes later, under the coordination of the teachers, the thousands of students were divided into several dozen square formations based on gender, height, and school. They looked very orderly, like a guard of honor of the 3 armies. In front of each square formation stood a teacher leading the team. Lotus Sun and Feather Lin were in the next square formation, led by Old Antique himself. At first glance, Wang Ling realized that only his own square formation didn't have a teacher standing in front of it. Could it be that they hadn't been assigned yet? While he was wondering, Wang Ling saw a familiar black car slowly stop on the edge of the square in the distance. The moment Jai Yin got out of the car from the driver's seat, Wang Ling seemed to realize something. And then, just as he had expected, Wang Ling saw a dumbass in a white coat pass through the countless square formations and arrive in front of them. Wang Ming bared his teeth and smiled shamelessly. Hello, students. I'm your teacher leading the team, Teacher Wang. You can also affectionately call me eldest brother Dai Dai. Chapter 710. As a researcher from the research consortium on this trip, Wang Ming's presence was completely expected. Furthermore, Head of State 001 was also in the experimental stage. If there was any problem with its operation, Wang Ming would be able to make adjustments in time. Wang Ming had the emergency brake button on Head of State 001 with him. In addition, President Qi had the remote brake program as a double precaution, but in an emergency situation, it would take time for the remote brake program to go from issuing the command to officially operating. Thus, the brake button on Wang Ming was a little safer. Right now, Head of State 001 was actually standing next to Wang Ming, but it was currently in invisible mode, and apart from Wang Ling and Fang Xing, no one else present could see it. Right now, Head of State 001 was in guard mode, and the data on all the students and teachers on this trip had already been entered into its data vault. Once a dangerous person appeared, Head of State 001 would automatically take action. Thus, the reason why Wang Ming was confident in being the lead teacher was precisely because he had Head of State 001 with him. On the other side, Wang Ling also noticed that Jai Yin had also changed into Huaxiao Alliance's custom-made white Daoist robes, and had become the lead teacher for the other group of students. Seeing this, Wang Ling was already as clear as a mirror about the general situation. At that moment, Super Chen suddenly asked, "Have I seen this teacher Wang leading the team somewhere before? He looks a little familiar." Dopigua nodded. "I also feel that he looks familiar." Wang Ling, during the joint military training exercise for the 6 schools previously, Wang Ming had gotten along well with Super Chen, Dopigua, and the others. But after the military training was over, in order to protect Wang Ming's identity, Wang Ling had erased their memories of him. As for the feeling of déjà vu now, it was a subconscious sixth sense. Furthermore, Wang Ling's impression of Wang Ming was that he was a very easygoing person. Apart from restraining himself a little in front of Zhai Yin, the rest of the time, he was always shameless. At that moment, more and more people had gathered in the square. Over 100 teachers and the research team's expert team were leading thousands of foundation establishment students deep into Beast King's remains to conduct research at the same time as the summer camp. This was quite new, but Wang Ling also noticed that there was no news of any media personnel in the vicinity of the square. In the early hours of the morning, martial law had already been imposed on the road with the square as the center. At that time, Wang Ling had actually speculated that the entrance to Beast King's remains might be in Peiyuan District Square. Based on the current situation, that should be the case. I didn't expect so many big shots to come to the ruins this time. Do you think our country will send the 10 generals to protect us since they value the ruins so much? Are these ruins really so dangerous? Super Chin asked curiously. Wang Ling, I've looked into it before. Devil Valley's Beast King relic is the tomb that Devil King left behind for himself. However, according to the rumors, the Devil King was stewed in his sleep. Of course, regarding the authenticity of this point, the current information is all different, there is no verification. Dopey Guo said, however, in order to decorate his tomb back then, Devil King once cultivated countless treasures in Devil Valley. This is also the reason why some resources that are now extinct can still appear in Devil Valley. As for whether there's any danger in Devil Valley, I heard that there isn't, because there aren't any signs of life in Devil Valley. For the time being, it can be regarded as a botanical garden. Hearing this, the corners of Wang Ling's mouth twitched. Divine. Botanical garden, but just because there were no living creatures in Beast King's remains didn't mean there were no risks. After all, it was very likely that a small portion of the plants inside had already cultivated to become spirits, so they couldn't rule out the possibility that they could attack people. Furthermore, some of the extinct resources inside were highly toxic, which was something that needed to be taken care of. Apart from that, the natural environment inside Devil Valley was also a major danger. And the most dangerous part was the problem of entering and leaving Devil Valley. There wasn't a specific set time for the opening of Devil Valley. Usually, the officials would detect the fluctuations at the entrance of the secret land in advance, and then arrange for entering and exiting the valley in advance. Thus, it was very important for them to follow the instructions of the teacher leading the team throughout the operation this time. Although this was a summer camp, most of the students couldn't go overboard. Otherwise, if they were locked in Devil Valley and didn't go out with the rest of the team, it would be extremely dangerous for them to be alone in Devil Valley, with only a slim chance of survival. Thus, after listening to Dopey Guo's heavy analysis, many of the students couldn't help feeling a little nervous. When all was said and done, they were only at the foundation establishment stage, and most of them hadn't seen much of the world. Furthermore, if they really had to fight, although they had actual combat training courses in high school, they still couldn't compare with professionals who had truly received combat training. Combat courses were only gradually introduced after entering university. Everyone could choose different specializations based on their own strengths, such as specializing in a certain type of weapon or magic, and so on. Now that it was an era of peace, the Education Commission had become stricter with the passing of combat skills. Wang Ling also heard that next year, they would officially introduce a combat qualification certificate. Except in special circumstances to ensure their safety, only licensed cultivators were qualified to fight in an urban environment. Otherwise, it would be considered a violation of the rules. In the future, the school would organize a uniform qualification examination for students who met the requirements every year, but whether they could get a certificate was another matter. If they could get a certificate, they could get extra points when they looked for a job in the future, just like all kinds of other skills certificates on the market. As long as you follow the teachers in line and don't act on your own, it won't be a big problem, a teacher said to all the students at that moment. Everyone was blank. What did he mean by it wouldn't be a big problem? In other words, there was still a problem. About 10 minutes later, not long after Wang Ming, more than 10 ambulances with flashing warning lights drove up to the edge of the square. "Teacher Wang, what's this?" Little Peanut asked Wang Ming at that moment. "There's risk in the remains, so we've arranged for an antibody vaccine for everyone. This all-purpose antibody injection before entering the remains can neutralize 95% of the toxicity even if you accidentally run into a poisonous plant," Wang Ming explained. "Antibody? Which company is this?" Lotus Sun, who was standing in the line next door, couldn't help asking after hearing Wang Ming's explanation. She was more familiar with medicine. "Don't worry, this is a legitimate company," Wang Ming quickly replied. "This time, Huaxiao Alliance is looking for serious partners. Not long ago, Changchun Biotechnology's vaccine went awry, and Gao Junfang, the unscrupulous dealer who made fake drugs, is now being punished. The cultivation court sentenced her to life in prison, and then told her to use up all her fake drugs." Chapter 711. A lot of medical staff got out of the ambulances with boxes in their hands. There were more than 60 of them, and the vaccine injections began to be carried out in an orderly manner. These medical staff also wore uniforms designated by Huaxiao Alliance, which had the Huaxiao Alliance logo printed on their white coats. It wasn't just the students this time, everyone had to be vaccinated, including the team of experts and the teachers who would be entering the remains. That was because a previous expert had gotten into trouble in Beast King's remains. Although he had come out alive in the end, because he hadn't been treated in time, the toxin had invaded his spine and directly paralyzed the lower half of his body. Thus, the antibody vaccine injection had become a must before entering Devil Valley. Not long after the ambulance arrived, Odd Zhuo of Songhai City's General Administration of 100 schools also arrived at the scene. As soon as he got out of the ambulance, he immediately approached a young man with slick back hair on one side of the square and stretched out his hand. "Thank you, President Han Di, for your strong support this time. Our Songhai City doesn't have that many all-purpose antibody vaccines in stock. If it wasn't for President Han Di's support, we really wouldn't know what to do this time. Isn't this also a strong support for the development of our country's scientific research? If our country wants to develop, we have to rely on this new generation. I'm really looking forward to their future." President Han Di gave a very righteous smile, then looked at the 1,000-odd students in the square. Finally, his gaze fixed on Wang Ming. "I never thought there would be such a young academician in our country's scientific research team. Every generation produces talented people, and each will lead the way for hundreds of years." Odd Zhuo smiled. He couldn't directly reveal Wang Ming's specific identity. This President Han Di was also very tactful, and didn't continue to ask about Wang Ming. Then, President Han Di changed the subject. "Director Zhuo, is this the entrance to the remains?" "According to the fluctuations, the entrance to the remains will indeed be in this square. If President Han Di is interested, we can witness the opening of the entrance. I heard that it will be a spectacular sight that even I haven't seen before." "Can I?" President Han Di asked. "Of course." Odd Zhuo smiled. But this smile made President Han Di frown. For some reason, he felt that Odd Zhuo was a little unreliable. At the same time, in the Huaxiao Alliance building in Jinghua City, Huaxiao Nation's Alliance of Cultivators headquarters. President Qi transferred the surveillance cameras in Peiyuan District Square, and the scene of Odd Zhuo and President Han Di's chat was directly displayed on the big screen. 2200, turn it up, President Qi instructed the staff member next to him. "Yes." In the headquarters, a technician in pitch-black overalls used space technology to directly extract the voices of Odd Zhuo and President Han Di in a noisy environment. This technician with the work number 2200 had been specially transferred over from Magnificent Immortal. As Huaxiao Nation's top special operations force, the Magnificent Immortal Special Operations Brigade had its own independent technical staff organization. The name of this organization was Old Black, and this 2200 was an experienced member of Old Black. President Chi vaguely remembered that when Old Black had just been established back then, there had been no more than 10 people. Later, Magnificent Immortal had taken a fancy to them and incorporated them all. Who would have thought that after so many years, it had already grown to more than 1,000 people? Unfortunately, the whereabouts of Old Black 001 from back then was unknown. Of AI. In the staff members the two then the Chi. Why do I feel that this President Han Di is a little strange? General Yi frowned as he floated in the air with his hands behind his back. Chi, President Yun. President Chi chuckled. This isn't the real President Han Di at all. The real President Han Di has already been swapped out. You already knew. General Yi raised an eyebrow. Of course. President Chi said, if I couldn't see through this little trick, it would be a waste of my title as Wisdom Saint. But I have to say that the other party's plan this time is very profound. If our customs hadn't stopped the real President Han Di at the checkpoint, I'm afraid we would all have been kept in the dark. Furthermore, I suspect that they might have already seen through the real and fake remains smokescreen, so it's very likely that the other party has also sent two groups of people to enter the real and fake remains. General Yi nodded, and then couldn't help sighing. In a situation where they couldn't be sure which side was real and which was fake, sending two groups of people was the most conservative choice. At the very least, the other party wouldn't mistake them for the wrong target. There was an advantage to this, and that was that the overall fighting strength of this foreign force would be halved. However, there was also a big risk that this foreign force might pose a threat to the students who entered the remains. Initially, we prepared the same scientific research team to deal with the fake remains, but since the other party has sent two groups of people, we naturally have to send out a fighting force to intercept those who try to enter the fake remains. Then, who are we sending? General Yi was silent. He actually didn't know anything about this at all. Several of the 10 generals have the important task of protecting the students, so my plan for the fake remains is to have General Bai take some people with him and wipe them out. So it's Explosion Saint, that's right. In any case, it's the fake remains, so Explosion Saint can do whatever he wants. Even if they all blow up, it won't hurt. In addition, I've also released the few prisoners locked up in the special cells of Prison No. 1 to assist General Bai in battle. My junior brother is also going? President Chi nodded. This has already been approved by the head of state. This is a chance for them to atone for their crimes. Their code name is Mahjong Squad. General Yi, what should we do with the real President Han Di now? This person has already been detained by customs, but I expect that after he comes out of seclusion and arrives in Mishio Nation, Night Chief will probably make a big move, and it's very likely that they'll get rid of the real President Han Di. So I've already sent more people to beat them at their own game and disguise themselves as the fleeing President Han Di. Night Chief is ferocious. It's very risky for us to send people after them, of course I know that, so the person we're sending this time isn't a person, but Head of State 001. Head of State 001. Isn't 001 with the children? That was the original plan, but in order to counter each move, this is the best choice, Yi Zichen said. You, old Chi, according to you, General Yi's scalp went numb when he thought of this. You're right, the head of State 001 with Wang Ming now is in fact the head of state himself. Chapter 712. To be honest, before the plan had even started, President Dylan had already sensed that something was very wrong and suspicious in the air. Given Huaxiao Nation's tight customs defenses, how could he have passed through them so easily? There was most likely a trap here. And so, about a day before the operation began, President Dylan had received a lead on the remains. But according to this lead, although the entrances to the remains were both in Songhai City, the coordinates were completely different. There are actually two remains. President Dylan stared at the intelligence in his hands and was lost in deep thought. Sure enough, things weren't as simple as he had thought. One of the two remains had to be a smokescreen. Next to President Dylan, a young girl with a machete on her back and a white mask on her face in a gothic dress spoke in a shrill voice. Should we change the plan? This girl was none other than Numinous Mother's rumored third disciple, Ghosthead Blade. No one, including President Dylan, had thought that Ghosthead Blade's true identity would actually be a girl before they met her. President Dylan cupped his chin in his hand and pondered for a bit. There's no other way. Right now, we can only split into two groups. You and I will lead a team of 10 million people to pay you on District Square, and the rest of us will split into another group. How do we get in? Ghosthead Blade asked. You and I can disguise ourselves as medical personnel accompanying us. In order to avoid giving the game away, I'll send someone to temporarily take over my identity as Han D tomorrow, President Dylan said. This was a plan within a plan. It sounded very safe and gave people a strong sense of security. Ghosthead Blade, remember, your mission is to capture that man called Wang Ming. You must capture him alive. The girl crossed her arms and said in an extremely cold voice, I can only do my best not to kill him. After all, this opponent was just an ordinary person who didn't know any cultivation techniques. Hence, Ghosthead Blade didn't care at all. In her eyes, he was nothing more than an ant. At around 10 o'clock in the morning before the remains activity began, all the antibody vaccines had been administered. Everyone sat down in the square and waited for the entrance to the remains to open. In the square formation, Wang Ling stared at head of State 001, who stood motionless next to Wang Ming. He didn't know if it had been an illusion, but it seemed that number 001's eyelids had twitched just now. To be honest, this was Wang Ling's first time seeing this kind of humanoid magic treasure. Although Wang Ming had introduced this new black technology to him before, Wang Ling still felt that it was a little too realistic. Even the twitching of an eyelid could be restored to the extreme. It could only be said that as expected of something developed by Wang Ming. Although it could be said that the overall development of the humanoid magic treasure was the blood and sweat of everyone at Huaxiu's Cultivation Academy of Science, it was Wang Ming who had designed the basic plan for the magic treasure. The most valuable thing about any magic treasure was its original design blueprint, just like the original blueprint for the gate between worlds which had fallen into Daoist Guang's hands. Although Daoist Guang had used it to wipe his butt back then, he hadn't been willing to throw it away at all. After washing it clean, it was a brand new drawing. In fact, after Daoist Guang had cleaned up Daoist Guang's mess, the original blueprint of the gate between worlds had probably risen in value. After all, this drawing had once been stained with true immortal shit. Just as Wang Ling's imagination was running wild like this, his eyes suddenly lit up. He suddenly looked up. He sensed a tremor in the air. Although it was extremely subtle, Wang Ling could still feel it. Was the entrance to the remains finally going to open? Wang Ling looked up at the sky and noticed that it had suddenly turned dark. After all, this Devil Valley was Beast King's remains. Given the style of the King of Holy Beasts, it was completely reasonable for a natural phenomenon to occur when the entrance to the remains opened. And he didn't know if it was an illusion. For some reason, Wang Ling felt that the air was suddenly filled with the aroma of a spicy hot pot. Elsewhere, in Songhai City's Shiling Road Border Village Park, the park had been completely closed for the last few days. Because Huaxiu Alliance had already set up the entrance to the fake remains here, all the nearby roads had been sealed off like the real remains. There were only specialist teams, medical teams and guards waiting respectfully at the entrance. The master of Immortal Mansion Chengyu, Evil Sword God and the Old Devil, who had returned his body to Jiang Luyue, were sitting in an armed van that had been driven directly from Songhai First Prison to Border Village Park. The fake body had been created by Huaxiu Nation's Academy of Science, and the Old Devil had just replaced it a while ago. Furthermore, the original body had been returned intact to the master of Shadow Stream Jiang Luyue. The effect of this fake body definitely wasn't as good as the body of an almighty, but given the current situation, this was already the limit. Of course, the fake body limited the Old Devil's experience to a certain extent, but as an all-powerful Great Devil Emperor back then, there was no doubt about his combat experience. In the van, the Old Devil rubbed his flat chest. To be honest, he still wasn't quite used to these two lumps of flesh. The old devil felt a little emotional in his heart, and so did the other people in the van. Sometimes, it was only when you lost something that you truly understood the importance of freedom. Master of Immortal Mansion Cheng Yu gazed at the scenery outside the window. After being locked up for so long, he realized that even the little spirit sparrows on the street had a unique beauty. Are we really going to go? Evil Sword God sat upright with a nervous expression on his face. We're going to kill people. Isn't that a bad idea? Shifu said that this isn't right. The young man with the long black hair who had been silent on the side was blank at this scene. Has he always been like this? The young man's expression was very cold, and he was wrapped up in a black flexible armor so that nothing could get through. The most recognizable things about him were two thick boxing gloves with black flame patterns on them. This person was none other than General Bai, the head of Huaxiao Nation's 10 generals and also known as Explosion Saint. The old devil spread his hands helplessly. Evil Sword God's mental state has been like this ever since he left his sword. General Bai frowned. He had thought that Evil Sword God was faking it, but now it seemed that there was indeed something wrong with his mental state. If this was the case, when it came to a real battle, it was very likely that he would become a burden. General Bai was quick-witted as he searched the internet for a photo of Evil Sword God when he had been arrested, a teenager with eyeshadow who looked a little like a punk. He then held up his phone and compared it with the current Evil Sword God. For some reason, General Bai felt that Evil Sword God seemed to be missing something. A few seconds later, General Bai finally realized what was wrong, and immediately reached out to touch Evil Sword God's eyes. He used cold fire to roast a pair of eyeshadow for Evil Sword God. Then, General Bai took out a mirror. Chen Nanxian, look at yourself. The moment he saw the mirror, Evil Sword God instantly stood up. Why am I so handsome? Why am I so handsome? Why am I so handsome? So handsome, handsome. The old devil and master of Immortal Mansion Cheng Yu, General Bai, does this count as coming back? The old devil, I think so, but I might not have recovered from my illness. Chapter 713. It turned out that the magic sword wasn't the most important factor. Sure enough, the eyeshadow was the main thing. Looking at Evil Sword God, who had suddenly returned to normal, but clearly hadn't fully recovered, the old devil fell into deep thought. It was very clear that Evil Sword God had two personalities, which would only be activated under certain circumstances. At the same time, General Bai couldn't help pondering this discovery. Here was the problem. When Sword Immortal Fan Rui had died at Evil Sword God's hands back then, which personality had he died under? This was a very important question, because it would become an important indicator for Evil Sword God's official sentence in the future. In addition, General Bai was suddenly very curious about another problem. If Evil Sword God was only given eyeshadow in one eye and not the other, what would happen? Elsewhere, the wind and clouds stirred in the sky above Peiyuan District Square. This moment gave Wang Ling a very familiar feeling, which was very similar to the one he had felt when the gate between worlds had descended 6 years ago. Everyone, get ready. The black-faced teacher from Tianshi Imperial High School stood at the very front. Then, a light suddenly appeared in his hand like a lotus blossoming. A 7-colored cube slowly flew into the air along with the light. It's finally here. At that moment, Old Antique looked up at the sky. Teacher, what is this? Someone asked. The rainbow glass box. This is one of Huaxiao Alliance's collection of magic treasures. Wu Zhenjuan, the chief leader of the teachers this time, is in charge of leading the team. Old Antique gazed at the black-faced teacher in front of him. It wasn't until then that everyone learned his name. Teacher Wu is amazing. But where have I heard the surname Teacher Wu before? Wu Zhenjuan is the son of the famous music master, irascible Dharmaraja Wu Yifan. Dharmaraja creation? No, it's irascible Dharmaraja, as in irascible. Speaking of the origin of this Daoist name, we have to start with the dispute between Daoist Wu Yifan and the evil tiger pouncing straight men cultivators association back then. Hearing this, a lot of people knew that old Antique was going to start gossiping again. They were going to start gossiping again. Back then, Daoist Wu and the evil tiger pouncing straight men cultivators association exposed each other's dirty laundry. In the end, the tiger pouncing on food straight men cultivators association found a recording of Daoist Wu singing while bathing. It is said that after listening to it, it will arouse a kind of irritable mood, making people unable to help but smash a big and round bowl and conveniently want to paste the batter in the bowl on your face. Everyone, he didn't know if it was an illusion, but after old Antique said this, Wu Jinjuan's face in the sky seemed to darken even more. Activating the rainbow glass box consumes a huge amount of spirit power, but Wu Jinjuan's face isn't red and he's not out of breath. Truly amazing. As he introduced the lead teacher, old Antique couldn't help sighing on the side. Huaxiao Alliance made the right decision to appoint Teacher Wu as team leader this time. Ha ha ha. How big is the difference between Teacher Wang and Teacher Wu? Someone could not help but laugh. Under normal circumstances, when most teachers were asked this question, their faces would definitely darken. But the problem was that old Antique wasn't afraid at all. No matter where you were, having a thick skin was always the most important thing. Looking at Wu Jinjuan, old Antique couldn't help laughing. Of course I can't compare to Wu Jinjuan. Teacher Wu is amazing. Someone else stirred up trouble. How many pieces of chalk would it take to kill him? Old Antique pretended to be thinking about it, and then replied with a serious expression, 10. Dopey Gua, ha, old Antique really likes to joke. To be honest, apart from their physiques, I feel that if they really fought, Wu Jinjuan would be in the lead. Super Chin, don't look down on the fatty, maybe it's true. Wang Ling, a few minutes later, the rainbow glass box officially came into play. Floating in the sky, it sent down a beam of light which enveloped all the students, the lead teacher, the research team and the medical staff in the square. In the blink of an eye, the dense crowd of people in the square instantly disappeared. Then, a crack appeared in the sky. In the cockpit of the rainbow glass box, Wu Jinjuan swiftly operated the box to escape into the crack. Is this the entrance to the secret land of Devil Valley? President Han Di asked next to Odd Zhua. Staring at the sky, Odd Zhua exhaled softly. Sir, can I trouble you to stop pretending to be President Han Di? The fake President Han Di's eyes instantly turned cold. After a long silence, the fake President Han Di finally tore off the skin imitation mask on his face. Below the mask was an extremely old face that was full of wrinkles. Ranked 8th in the Dark Network, currently a key S-class wanted target in Huaxiao Nation, Thousand Faces Old Man, Odd Zhua directly gave the fake President Han Di's family background and personal information, then stared at Myriad Faces Old Man and said solemnly, because of your powerful disguise technique, I haven't been able to track you down. I never thought that you would actually deliver yourself to our doorstep for this operation. Myriad Faces Old Man's strength lay in his disguise technique, which could deceive even the most sophisticated disguise identification equipment. Although he wasn't strong in battle, he was a very troublesome enemy. Myriad Faces Old Man frowned. May I ask, when did Director Zhua find out? We found out from the very beginning. As for the real President Han Di hiding among the medical staff, oh no, to be precise, it should be Night Chief's second President Dylan, who is using President Han Di's identity. We deliberately let him in, Odd Zhua replied. Actually, Odd Zhua himself hadn't noticed at the beginning, but Wang Ling was in the square. Who could hide from Shifu's eyes? Myriad Faces Old Man, it seems that Director Zhua's reputation for being in this position isn't undeserved. Catch him. At that moment, the special service personnel whom Odd Zhua had arranged to be in the vicinity of the square removed their invisibility talismans and swarmed forward. Each of the 6 special service personnel was a nascent soul expert. These were all elites who had been directly dispatched from Huaxiao Alliance HQ to ensure that Myriad Faces Old Man could be captured. Staring at Myriad Face's old man, they formed hand seals and jointly cast a suppressive spell on him. But Myriad Face's old man was completely unafraid. He gazed at Odd Jua and chuckled. He fixed his eyes on Odd Jua and chuckled, and actually threw out a dazzling light bomb directly from his pocket. The light lasted for a very short time, and Myriad Face's old man didn't have time to escape at all. Thus, in that moment, he immediately decided to transform himself into Odd Jua. Instantly transform. Odd Jua was a little surprised. This kind of disguise was a little beyond his imagination. This already wasn't the hand speed of someone who had been single for 18 years, there were two identical Director Juas, which one should he catch? In that instant, the 6 special service personnel were stupefied. There's no other way. In that instant, Odd Jua had an idea. There was no way Myriad Face's old man would have the long johns he was wearing. And so, in front of everyone, Odd Jua unbuckled his belt and looked like he was about to take off his pants, but before he could do so, on the other side, Myriad Face's old man, who was pretending to be Odd Jua, was already suppressed by a strong halo of light. Myriad Face's old man was alarmed. "You, how did you know?" He had actually been seen through in an instant. One of the special service personnel sneered. "Because you're not as perverted as Director Jua." You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.